Today is 21 December 2023. I have the pleasure of interviewing Uri Winterstein. Winterstein?
Either.
Sorry, should I start again?
Just carry on.
My name is Denise Bruce. I am the interviewer, and the location that we're filming this is in London, in the United Kingdom. And the interview will be done in English. Hi, can you please state your first, middle, and last name and spell them as well?
It's Uri Stefan Winterstein, spelled Uri-Stefan and Winterstein.
And your current address, Uri?
It's 56 Wavendon Avenue, London, W4 4NS, UK.
And can you tell me if there's any significance to your first name that your parents gave you?
Well, it's a Jewish name. It's a Hebrew name. And it comes from Uriel was the angel of light. I think it means light.
It means light, okay.
Yeah.
And your first language?
My first language I understand was Slovak. I say I understand because I do not speak it at all now, okay. Sadly.
And that your preferred interview language will be English?
Yes.
Okay. And the name that you had at birth, is it the same that you use now?
Yes, it is.
Your place of birth, Uri?
I was born in Bratislava, the capital of Slovakia. I should say when you ask
Bratislava,
Bratislava, Bratislava. I should add, can I just add about my name? I didn't have a birth certificate. I've not had a birth certificate. So when you say it's my name, that is a name I've known since childhood, but I had no document saying that at the time.
Okay. Okay. And your date of birth?
13th October 1943.
Your religious identity, first when you were younger, do you know of that?
I've known since ever I can remember anything that I was Jewish, and that has always been my identity, a very strong part of my identity.
And as you were growing up with your family when you were reignited, was it practicing Jewish within the home?
It's not a very religious home. What I remember is my father taking me on high holy days to the synagogue, but generally we were not Orthodox.
Okay. And what would you say your cultural identity is?
My cultural identity is a mix because I've lived in so many places. And so I'm Jewish, international almost. If I have to pick a country, I probably most closely would identify with being an American because I went to an American school from the age of 6. I went to American universities. I lived in the States for 8 years. And when I was young, people didn't believe me if I said I wasn't actually an American in the States. But so I find the question hard to say. You know, I've now become part British, but I can only be part.
And do you identify at all, as you've grown up and now as an adult, with being Slovakian?
I did not identify as a Slovakian. I think from a childhood point of view, that seemed to be something bad. I think that's why I forgot Slovak. I forgot Slovak in the space of 3 weeks when I was 5 years old, because my parents sent me to a summer camp to learn English, to start school. And after 3 weeks when I came home, I did not understand Slovak. Now that's not really possible, except psychologically, where you say this is something bad and lock it away. And unfortunately, I locked it away too long. I would love to recover it. But I had no reason to identify with Slovakia. It was part of the Iron countries behind the Iron Curtain for most of my earlier life. So it almost wasn't there for me. You know, I couldn't visit it. I couldn't do anything. But I now have a Slovak passport again. Again, I don't know if I ever had one, but I have a Slovak passport. And I'm grateful to the Slovak authorities for giving me the passport.
And just to go back a bit, when you said that your parents sent you to a camp, that would have been obviously post-war.
Yes.
That camp was in what country?
Oh, in England. This was 1949, and they would have sent me to a summer camp.
And you would consider your political affiliation as what?
I would put myself on a liberal side of politics, wherever you want it. So in America, I would probably identify more with Democrats than Republicans. But I'm very middle of the road. I'm not on any extreme either way. I find the extremes are what frighten me on either way.
Okay. And your college education, where was that taken?
That was at the University of Pennsylvania. I went both as an undergraduate, and then I did an MBA at the Wharton School there. So I spent 6 years altogether there.
Okay. And the occupation that you took as an adult?
Well, I had in Brazil. I worked for a few years in industrial market research. That would probably be the best thing one could call it, consultancy sort of work. But in London, I've worked in the banking sector for roughly 30 years till I retired, in various different departments there.
Okay. And do you belong to any organizations currently?
Well, I belong to a synagogue, and I'm a volunteer for the Holocaust Educational Trust. I go to schools in the United Kingdom talking about my family's and my experiences in World War II on their behalf.
Okay, we can explore that a little
Yeah.
bit more than that than later. So we're going to go and find out. Could you please tell us what the names of your mother, your father, and your sister?
Okay. My father's name was Wojciech Winterstein. My mother's was Margit Winterstein, and my sister is Viera Ruth Winterstein, although we all called her simply Ruth. And she has trouble if someone says Viera, she doesn't recognize it, they're talking to her.
And can you please spell your father's first name?
Yes, it's Vojtech. Wojtek.
And your mother's first name?
Margit, Margit,
And what was your mother's maiden name?
was Rosenberg.
And could you spell that,
Yeah.
please?
Rosenberg.
And what year was your father born and where?
Right. He was born on the 22nd of March, 1903, in the village of Banovce in Slovakia.
Can you spell that, please,
Yeah,
Ernie?
Banvoce. Banovce.
And what was his profession?
He was a lawyer by profession.
And your mother, when was she born?
She was born on the 14th of January, 1909, in Moravska Ostrava. I understand that's the city of Ostrava now.
And is that
That's now
what
in
country was that?
That's now in the Czech Republic.
Okay.
But when I was born, of course, the country was, in theory at least, Czechoslovakia. I say in theory because Hitler separated them during the war, but no one recognized that. And
Okay. And was your father raised in a traditional Jewish home?
Yes, he was raised in what seemed to be a more traditional Jewish home, which I only realized with time because our home wasn't. That when I went to prayers, he could recite a lot of prayers by heart. And so I realized that was all from his early life, that he must have had a religious, strong religious upbringing.
And your mother, was she educated?
Yes, my mother studied law, so she was a lawyer as well. But she didn't, I don't believe her parents were very religious, particularly because she wasn't, and nor were her brother or sister who I knew. So I don't believe the household was.
And was that an issue for your father?
Sorry?
Was it an issue for your father that your mother?
Well, my mother
Not
did raise it with him. She was a very feisty, upfront woman, and she said when he talked to her about marriage, she said, "I am not going to keep kosher," and he accepted that. So, whatever issues he had, he obviously considered more important, the relationship more important.
And what, do you know at all if his family was accepting of that? Was there an issue?
No, I know nothing about any reactions of anyone, but I would imagine that his parents would be happy because A, she was Jewish, and B, she was a lawyer, which was pretty rare for a woman. So she was a catch, I'd say.
And do you know where your father was educated?
No, I don't know which university he went to.
And
I
your
kind of
mother?
assume he went to University of Bratislava, but I don't know why. He was in Slovakia. My mother, I know, went to University of Prague. I know that.
And your sister, can you spell her name and tell us what her date of birth is?
Yes, her first name is Viera, and then Ruth, Ruth, and Winterstein, as I've spelled. She was born on the 9th of July, 1937.
Okay. And your father, when did he die?
He died in June 1970.
And where was he living at the time when he died?
In Rio de Janeiro, Brazil.
Rio. Okay. And your mother as well, when did she pass away?
She died in September 1987, also in Rio.
And
Also in Rio.
Okay.
Yeah.
Ollie, can you, okay, here we go. And your sister, is she alive?
Yes, she is.
And where does she live?
She lives in Rio still.
Okay.
She's frail. She's not in the best of health. She's leaving the hospital today. She's been in hospital for a couple of weeks.
And how often do you get to see your sister?
Twice a year. I've tried to see her twice a year.
Okay.
Yeah.
And do you recall your grandparents on either side of your?
I never knew my grandparents. My grandfathers died before the war, so well before I was even born. And my grandmothers, I believe it was 1942 when they were deported. So before I was born. Certainly, I never knew them.
And did you have any great-grandparents that you know of as a young child?
No, I know that my father's grandmother, so a great-grandmother of mine, was deported to the camps also. She was 91 years old when she was deported. But I believe all of that was in 1942.
Did your father have any siblings?
Yes, he had two brothers and two sisters.
Do you know their names?
Uh, yes, there was my father was the oldest of the boys. The next one was Jenna, and the
Can you
youngest.
spell that? Excuse me. Can you
Like
spell their names as well?
Like Eugene, Eugene,
Okay.
Jenna Winterstein, and the youngest was Ladislav, or Latsi. We all called him Latsi, Laci, Winterstein. Although I think formally his name was Ladislav, I believe. Yeah.
And the two sisters?
There was Berta and Herta.
Did any of them have spouses or children?
They were both married, and they each had a daughter.
Your aunts or uncles?
Sorry. Well, all five of them were married. But I was
Okay.
now talking about the two sisters. They each had a daughter because they were the family that died, part of the family
Okay.
that died in Auschwitz.
And your mother's side, did she have siblings?
She had a brother and a sister. Both of them married, but both of them got out of Czechoslovakia while it was still possible and survived that way.
And are you aware of how they got out?
In the case of my mother's sister, she married a man who worked for Batya, the shoe company, a Czech shoe company that was international, and Batya sent him to Egypt as a way to get them out of difficulty. Probably in 1938, I think it was, or something like that. And my uncle Otto, my sister's brother, he was a lawyer, and he had not only the fact that he was Jewish against him in terms of the Nazis, but he had defended communists at trials, although he wasn't a communist. So he was literally on the last train out of Prague, apparently, that was able to get out. But his wife.
And how do you spell his first name, Uri?
Otto, O-T-T-O.
And
his
I'm
wife,
sorry, your aunt's name was?
Which one? His wife's?
No, but your mother's sister.
Lisa, Lisa.
Okay.
Well, I think it
And
was
at
an.
the
I think it was
time,
an
both
E.
were married
Sorry,
when
I
they
think it
were
was
able
an
to
E.
leave.
Lise, Lisa. They were both married.
Lisa.
Yeah.
So at the time that both of them were able to leave, they were married, and did they
Yeah.
have children?
No, they had no children. And
Okay.
in Otto's case, he was able to get out, but my Aunt Edith didn't. She didn't go with him because she said she wasn't feeling well enough, and she stayed behind.
Otto's wife.
Otto's wife, yeah.
So let's start with when I know that you were a baby during this, though the memories that you have are going to be from other people and from what you know growing up. So who in your family were deported to the camps?
Okay, my direct family was my father, my mother, and sister all ended up in camps.
What year was that?
That was 1944.
And were they part of a deportation? How did they end up in the camps?
Well, To begin with, in September 1944, following a popular uprising against the Slovak government in August, which it took the German army to put down, the Germans took more direct control of the government. And also, Adolf Eichmann sent SS officer Alois Brummer to Bratislava as his envoy, so to deal with Jewish affairs. And Brummer announced on his arrival in Bratislava that his top priority was ridding Slovakia of all remaining Jews. And one of his first decrees was that the remaining Jews of Bratislava should all be housed in certain selected apartment buildings that they had. So my parents and sister were moved into a room in one of these apartments. Now, my parents always had a plan to go into hiding when they felt that the danger was very imminent. So I understand that they discussed that evening that the next day they should put their plan into action. But as bad luck would have it, a train arrived. The Germans didn't know when trains would be available. I think that's why they housed the Jews in selected apartment buildings, to make it as quick as possible to get them to the train, because the war was going badly and trains were rare. So the building was surrounded by German soldiers at dawn, and soldiers came into all the rooms ordering everybody out. And my mother pleaded with the soldier who came into their room to leave my sister behind. She was 7 years old, and my parents thought she had a better chance of survival if she was left, not taken to a camp with them. And to my surprise, when she told me this story, this soldier didn't just say, "Shut up and get on with it." He said, "I have to ask my superior officer." And this officer surprised me even more when I heard it, because he showed a lot of humanity. Amazingly, here's a man busily rounding up all the Jews to be deported, and he's somehow touched by this request. And he not only agreed to my mother's request, he went further, because he said, "Who's going to look after the girl?" So he said, "We'll leave the mother as well." So my father was deported on that occasion, and my mother and sister were allowed to go. Although one of the soldiers, as they were leaving, turned around and said, "We'll catch you later." Nevertheless, my family, my parents and my sister, all believe that that act saved her life, that she would not have survived if she'd been taken to camp on that day. And my mother and sister, the same day, were on a tram going to a hiding place, They were traveling with a good friend of my father's, Dr. Ernst Abeles, who was also a member of the working group. And my mother told me she felt very uncomfortable about a German soldier who seemed to be staring at them. So she said, "Let's just get off at the next stop to get rid of him." But when they got off, the soldier followed them, and now he came up to them and demanded to see their ID papers. All adults had to have identification papers. And while Dr. Abeles was fumbling around in his pockets for his papers, my mother grabbed my sister's hand and said, "Run." And they ran. And my sister, who told me her part only recently, said she was afraid the soldier would shoot at them, so she looked behind. But he was just looking bemused, and he clearly thought it was a family unit, and he turned to Abeles and said, "You better go join your wife and daughter." Though he also added those words, we'll catch you later. Nevertheless, it was another act of humanity. So that day, my mother and sister had these two close calls, but were able to go into hiding with Abeles and Abeles's family and a couple of few other Jews as well, in a bunker under a building. So you could say, how lucky can you be? But their luck eventually ran out because a young woman who was in hiding with them wrote an indiscreet letter to her boyfriend, and this was intercepted somehow, fell into the hands of the Gestapo, and it led them to the hiding place. And this time there wasn't any escape. So that is how my mother and sister were caught.
The time difference between when your father went and when your mother and sister went, do you know how much time that was?
I don't know the exact dates, but I think my father was taken in late September, and I believe this must have been late December. Probably something like late November, December time. Because one of the stories my mother told me also was that when they were in the hiding place and when they were discovered, my mother said she had a problem because my father had written her a number of letters when he had been in hiding on his own, because at one stage there was an arrest warrant for him. And he had written her a number of letters, but he had instructed her to destroy the letters because they contained incriminating material about the working group. But my mother, out of sentimentality, obviously afraid she might not see her husband again, I guess, had kept those letters. So she said she was now afraid they would fall into the hands of the Germans. So there was a stove in the middle of this bunker for a bit of heating. And she said she put the letters under her sweater and went to the stove, and before the guards realized what she was doing, she'd opened the grate and threw the letters in, which were destroyed. But
And to go back,
that
that bunker that she was in, do you know how many people were there with her?
I don't know exactly how many. Certainly Abelis's wife and I think a child of theirs. And at least this young woman who sent the letter, but I don't know if there were many. I don't believe there could be too many more, but there were a few people there in this bunker.
Does your mother know if that gentleman survived the war?
Yes, Abelis survived the war and went to live in Israel and was a witness in the Eichmann trials. So there is information of him as a witness at Eichmann's trial in Israel.
And do you know his full name, and could you spell it or no?
Abelis is Abeles, and his first name was Dr. Ernst, Ernest. Dr. Ernst
And did his
Abeles.
wife or children survive with him?
Yes. Yeah.
Do you know if he's still alive?
Oh, he's not alive. No. They'd all be over
Okay.
100 now.
So when they were in the bunker, they were discovered via this woman sending this letter. And then my understanding is that they were rounded up and then taken to where?
They were originally taken to a labor camp in Slovakia itself known as Seret, which I believe is spelled S-E-R-E-T.
Okay.
And my father still was in Seret when they came there. But they were then very quickly sent off to Theresienstadt, which is a camp where they then were till the end of the war.
Theresienstadt in Auschwitz.
No. Theresienstadt is a town also known as Theresen. Theresienstadt is a German name. Theresen is a Czech name. Or it's on the border. It's in the what's the Czech Republic now, near the border with Germany, but more importantly with Poland, and it had good rail connections to Poland. So the reason why the Germans picked Theresienstadt as a camp was its nature. It had been built in the late 18th century as a military fortress town, so it had a wall all around it. And there were apparently some 6,000 to 7,000 people living there, so the Germans moved them out, and they had an instant camp. They could move the Jews in. Of course, it was a heavily crowded place, but with a fluctuating population, because Theresienstadt was not a slave labor camp or a death camp. It was genuinely what you call a concentration camp, although huge numbers of people sent there died there. Almost 25% of the Jews who were sent there actually died there because of the very limited food, and the serious overcrowding meant if anyone caught an illness that could be spread, it went through the community very quickly. And there were the odd killings there as well, of course. People were executed there as well. But
when your mother and sister were brought there, do you know what the time frame was from the time they got there until they found your father was there?
No, they found my father in Seret. The three of them were sent together to Theresienstadt.
Okay. Yes, to Seret.
From Seret to Theresienstadt, but I don't know the time frames.
And was there any time when your mother and sister arrived at Theresienstadt that your mother was concerned that your sister they were going to be separated?
Sorry, did they feel that they...
Was your mother and your sister separated when they got to Theresienstadt?
No.
They were not.
Theresienstadt wasn't like Auschwitz or some of the other camps, so that the families were together. And it was because of its nature, it was used for propaganda by the Germans, and they even made a film to show the world that the Jewish community was being reasonably treated in a setting that looked normal to people, rather than wooden barracks that you might expect in many concentration camps, etc. And it also served that purpose for a Swiss I think it was I don't know if it was Swiss, it was a Red Cross committee, either Swiss or Danish, who went to Theresienstadt. The Germans invited them to say, look, we're not treating the Jews so badly. Look, it was a false picture.
Was anybody in your family involved in that?
Well, my family were there at the time, and the Germans put on a real show for the visit. First of all, my mother told me that they tried to send out extra loads of people to other camps to make it less crowded, so it wasn't as badly crowded. But more importantly, they wanted to make it look like normal life was going on. They opened a bakery, so you had all these wonderful smells and bread, as if people could actually access it. They had printed special money for Theresienstadt, as if business was going on. And the only thing my sister told me until very recently was that she saw a most magical puppet show there. And this was all part of an effort to fool this committee on their visit, and it worked. They declared themselves satisfied that under war conditions, things seemed to be all right. But for me, the silver lining in that story was that my mother told me they were told there was going to be a special train to take all Jewish leadership in the camps and their families to Switzerland. And she said they were very concerned about this story because it seemed a highly unlikely event. And when this committee was there, they were asked about this train, and they said they knew nothing about the train. And I'm now imagining that they took the story up with the commandant because it was never mentioned again. That was the end of that particular story.
Do you know what your parents' and your sister's day-to-day life was while they were there?
No, I don't know much about their life there. I know my mother told me that volunteers were asked to go collect potatoes in the fields. Now the fields were cold. This was hard physical work. My mother was a city girl as a child. She was a lawyer, now working behind a desk. But she immediately volunteered and got a good friend of hers to volunteer as well, because she said there might be a chance to steal a potato or two for the family. And under the circumstances I've outlined to you, you can understand that a potato would be worth more than its weight in gold to anyone in Theresienstadt. And she did steal potatoes for the family doing this. Clearly at a lot of risk, I'm sure. If she'd been discovered, it would have been a very serious infringement. But she managed to do it.
Did your father have a job while he was there?
No.
And did
nobody
your
had a job there.
sister-
There
Go
weren't
ahead.
jobs as such. They just pretended for the committee that came that life was normal, but there wasn't really anything for them to do. I do know that there was a lot of art done with children, because some of that has survived and been put on show even, the children of Theresienstadt's art. But not otherwise. I can tell you only a couple of stories from Theresienstadt, if you like, that I was told.
Yes, please do.
On one occasion, my father was sent to the train station to be sent to Auschwitz. And again, as luck would have it, the secretary of the German commandant of the station was a slave labor woman, a Jewish woman. And she recognized my father. And she pleaded with the commandant not to send him. She claimed that he was her fiancé. And in yet another act of humanity, this commandant sent my father back to Theresienstadt. And the only other story that came down to me was from my sister recently, who said she was on the street when she saw a German soldier. Now, a German uniform meant danger to her. And she said she was so terrified, she wanted to sink into the ground, be invisible. And as children do, she said she stared at her shoes, like if she couldn't see him, he wouldn't see her. But of course he could see her. And he came up to her and he patted her on the head and he said, "Little girl, don't be afraid. I have a little daughter just like you." And it was pure act of humanity there. He walked off, nothing else was said. So those are the few stories that I was told from Auschwitz, from Theresienstadt. So I don't know anything else from there.
Do you know when your family was forced to wear the yellow star?
I don't know the date. I know that amongst the laws that the Slovak government passed, and Hitler invited the head of the Slovak People's Party, who were a party in Slovakia who were echoing very much the anti-Semitic language of the Nazis. So he invited the head of the Slovak People's Party to Berlin in the middle of March 1939. And by that time, the head of the party was a man called Joseph Tiso. He was actually a Roman Catholic priest, Father Joseph Tiso. And my father had a bit of history with him, actually. Hitler invited him, if that's a correct word even, to declare Slovakia independent, which Tiso did. Now, to show you how important the anti-Semitism was, Tiso had to go back to Bratislava, set up a new government. But already in April, the next month, they started to pass the first of a series of anti-Jewish laws. So quite where the yellow star came in, I don't know, but I imagine it would have been a relatively early one, because the Jews in Slovakia were living scattered amongst the rest of the population, and how are people going to know who was a Jew or not? So there was this law that everyone over the age of 6 had to wear this yellow star with the word Jude on it, which is German for Jew. And I'll put this up for the camera. It was when my mother died, we found this star. I don't know if it was my father's or my mother's, or even why it was kept. I would imagine maybe it was kept to say it wasn't just a nightmare, it was real, that it really happened. But yes, everyone over the age of 6 would have to wear that when leaving their homes. Yeah.
And go to the next level of your family. Do you know who else was deported to the camps within your family?
Well, my father's grandmother, one of his grandmothers. So
do you know her name?
No, I don't know her name.
Okay.
Very sad. She was 91 years old when she was deported. My family.
Do you know
Sorry?
Do you know do you know to where she was deported?
To Auschwitz. All the family perished in Auschwitz. So she was sent to Auschwitz. My father's 2 sisters, along with their husbands, were deported there. Now, I said that they each had a daughter. Judith was 15 years old. She was actually in the streets when she was picked up by German soldiers and deported on her own. They obviously felt she was old enough to be treated like an adult. And her parents, when they heard what had happened, were so distraught that they volunteered to go on the next train to join her. Now, this was 1942, and nobody knew about death camps. So I'm sure that they realized that conditions would be grim wherever they were sent. But they did not know that the end of the tracks was a place called Auschwitz. Now, my other cousin, Miriam, was 9 years old when she was deported together with her parents and one of her grandmothers, who was my father's mother, and so my grandmother as well. They were the only members of the family of whom my family had eyewitness accounts after the war as to what happened to them. And we were told that Miriam and her parents and grandmother were sent straight to the gas chambers. But my parents didn't know what happened to any of the other members of the family who were sent there. I learned much more recently from a cousin of mine that our great-grandmother, who was 91 years old, actually survived for quite a while. She had pneumonia and survived pneumonia, but then ended up in being sent to a gas chamber. Now, the last member of my family who died in Auschwitz was my other grandmother, my mother's mother. But other members of the family, as I say, survived. Those were the ones who perished there.
Your father's 2 brothers and 2 sisters, what happened to them?
No. My father's 2 sisters and their families perished there. My father's brothers, one, Eugen, went to Tel Aviv in 1938, I believe, with his wife and settled there. And my father's youngest brother, Latsi, and his wife managed to survive the 6 years of this nightmare with false ID papers under which they were Aryans, and they were able to survive that period. The papers were obviously good enough that they were able to do that. They obviously had to go to a city where they weren't known, because otherwise someone would end up, might denounce them. So they had to be somewhere where they weren't known and take on this Aryan identity and survive that
Do you know
way.
what city that was that they went to?
No, I don't know where they went.
And after the war, was your father able to be in touch with them?
Yeah, after the war, he was in touch with his with both families. We were together with his younger brother because even I knew them in Slovakia because I was 5 years old when we left, and so I knew my uncle and aunt, and by the time shortly after the war they had a son, so I knew my cousin then as well. They subsequently had 2 more children, but that was after I had left. I didn't know them till much later. And
if we can go back to before your family was forced to go into this different living situation prior to them getting deported, it appears that you wouldn't have been maybe a year old.
Sorry.
How old were you when that happened, when your parents were forced from their home into a different apartment prior to them being deported?
Because they gave me away for safekeeping when I was a month old.
Oh, a month old. Okay.
Yeah, I was a month old. So I wasn't reunited.
What was the determining factor for them? Had everything started to go wrong then? What was the determining factor for your parents to do that?
The determining factor for them was, as I say, they were aware that they might have to go into hiding at short notice, and they had this plan in their back pockets. But they were also aware that it would be almost impossible to hide with a baby. Difficult enough to tell a child you've got to be quiet when a German army search is underway, but impossible to tell a baby. So their solution was to give me away. And that's why when I was a month old, they gave me to a woman that my father knew. And I always found it fascinating that she was a Sudeten German. Actually, she was born in Vienna. But my father trusted her and gave me to her for safekeeping. So I had no contact really with my family until after the war, although recently my sister told me that they visited me once, and she remembered that visit, and that I was being well looked after, but that the family expressed concern that a German officer had moved into the apartment in the building where they were living, and they were afraid that he might twig to the fact that they were hiding a Jewish child. I don't know any more of that story, but since I'm here, either he never twigged to it, or I'd like to think he had enough humanity not to denounce me.
The person that what did she do for a living, this woman, and how old was she, do you know?
She must have been, wait a minute, she must have been in her 60 or something like that. I used to think she must have been a younger person, that she would be someone who could be the mother, so to speak. But it was actually her daughter who became the woman I was, in whose care I was, her mother and husband, her daughter and husband's. She was a journalist, was what my father knew her as, but I understand she was also a writer, a poet, and she made her living, certainly under communism, as a translator. She was very poorly treated, unfortunately, after the war.
The building that she lived in, did her daughter live there as well?
Yes, it was a a building with 3 apartments. It was quite a nice building. I saw the building when I went to Bratislava in 2019, and it was a nice big building. And her father owned the whole building, and she inherited it. She lived in one of the flats, one floor. Her daughter, husband, and I and her, and as I found out later, they had a son, lived on another floor. And then this German officer took the 3rd apartment.
How old was their own child?
Their own child is literally 3-4 weeks younger than me.
And do you know when your parents made the decision, was it a decision between the 2 of them that they were agreed upon, and for a mother to give a child?
They didn't tell me how they came to the decision. They must have agreed, because if my mother didn't agree, it wouldn't happen. So they will have agreed it. I imagine that they had a lot of time to think about it, knowing my mother was pregnant. What were they going to do? And so they had time to come up with their plan. And also, I realized that I didn't have a birth certificate because they wouldn't have wanted the authorities to know that there was another Jewish child. So I was born at home, and I never had a birth certificate then. The authorities didn't officially know of my existence. And I was given away very soon. Sorry?
Between your parents and this woman as to if they survived the war, what would then happen to find you and to take you back?
Yes, they would certainly take me back. And what happened was, at the end of the war, my aunt, who was in hiding under the false papers, was the one who knew where I then was. I was no longer with this original family. At some point, they gave me to a local peasant woman to be in their care. And she knew where I was, and she's the one who collected me. And I don't know how quickly my parents and sister were able to make their way from Theresienstadt back to Bratislava, because Theresienstadt was not liberated until the end of the war. And when the war ended, first of all, everyone in those camps was very weak. There was a lot of illnesses, diseases. So people were not allowed out of those camps till the authorities felt it was safe for them to not spread diseases, etc. So I don't know how long it took before my parents and sister made it back to Bratislava. Whenever that was, I was then reunited with them.
Do you know that they stayed with you, the journalist and her family, in Bratislava the entire time?
Well, what I was told by my family was that because this woman was Sudeten German, when the Russian soldiers were approaching Bratislava, and it was the Russians who liberated Slovakia, that they left because they were afraid both the local population and the soldiers would take out their anger on everything that they'd suffered. And certainly the local population would blame the Sudeten Germans for what had happened to some degree. So this is what I was told, that they disappeared because of that, and put me in care of a local Slovak peasant woman. But I don't know at what stage this happened. The son of the family, the boy who I was growing up with during that period and was my first playmate in that sense, he understood that I was with the family to the end of the war and that they didn't go anywhere. And I've tried to put these two stories together. And all I can do is say, well, this family expressed concern to my family about this officer. And maybe what happened was because of that, they put me in the care of this other woman. But I'm now trying to, make sense out of the bits I've been told. I don't actually know for a fact what happened really there.
So are you aware of how old you were when that happened?
Well, I don't know exactly what month it was. I know I was 19 months at the end of the war. And I was 1 month old when I went to them. But what happened in those 18 months, as to when I left them for this other woman, I don't know when it was. I know I was with the original family in the summer of '44 because I was told a story about that by my mother. She told me that we were on the outskirts of Bratislava in a forest. It was a very hot day, so I must have been 8 to 10 months old, somewhere like that. I was playing in the dirt, and I had no nappy or any clothes because it was so hot. And I now realize, although in the original story I didn't know it, that Peter must have been there also, so there would have been two babies there. And who came walking through the forest but the wife of the German commandant of Bratislava, together with her daughter, so attracted by the babies, they came over. And she would almost certainly have realized I was a Jewish child. But again, I assume she had more humanity than her husband and didn't denounce me. Of course, if I'd been denounced, I would almost certainly have been killed, but the family who were hiding me would have suffered severe punishment as well. It was a serious crime to hide a Jew. And so this family took an enormous risk in hiding me. And they not only hid me, they hid 3 adult Jews and another boy as well. So I'm in awe of what they did, and wonder if I would have been brave enough to do such a thing. Yeah.
Do you know, have you been told what your day-to-day life was there, where you spent your time, what they were feeding you,
All right.
anything like that?
Know very little about it, except that I learned when I met their son that his mother used to put food for the 3 adults. They were hiding on the outskirts of Bratislava in a shack that they had there in the pram, and they sat the 2 of us on top of it, and she would take the food to them that way. So I learned, to my great joy, my first job in life was as a decoy for food for other hidden Jews. Although, of course, I knew nothing about it. This was something she did. But the only thing I know is, as I say, my sister said they felt I was being well looked after, and I'm sure I was. And so I probably had a pretty good life with them, under them. Now, the situation changed.
You had mentioned to me earlier when we spoke before this that there was a special type of breakfast that you were given then.
The situation changed when I got put in the care of the Slovak peasant woman, because it was clear that this woman wasn't really wanted to take care of a child. So my aunt, who is the one who collected me, as I say, told me, I was 19 months old, she said, I couldn't walk at all because, she said, the woman left me in the cot the whole time. I couldn't speak, I didn't speak a word, and all I ate was a roll dipped in coffee. And it turns out that I fell ill with this woman, and I suffered from vomiting and diarrhea both. And she discovered the roll dipped in coffee stayed down. So this became my food for whatever the time was I was with her. And even for a period afterwards, that's all I would eat. My poor mother struggled for years. I feel ashamed of myself. I struggled for years to try to increase the range of foods that I would eat. And she did reasonably, but there's a long list of foods that I still, unfortunately, to this day don't eat. And a roll dipped in coffee remained my breakfast until I went to university. I loved it. I loved that roll in coffee.
And do you still take that as
No,
to this date?
At university that stopped. I was living with other people. I didn't do that. So that stopped then.
You mentioned your aunt. So did she know when there was a transfer from the journalist family to the aunt, to the peasant woman?
I don't know what she knew. The only thing she ever told me was she knew where I was and collected me. But I don't know anything else, and unfortunately she died quite a few years ago now. The sad thing is I didn't ask questions when it was possible, but I think both when you're young you're focused on the future more, but also I think as a child you sense when things are very difficult for your family, and you don't touch on those things unless they do it. So there's a lot of questions I can't answer. I wish I'd asked the questions myself, but I don't know.
When your parents were and your daughter and your sister were liberated,
Yeah.
what was their health like? Do you know?
I do not know, as I say, and I don't know how long it was before they were allowed to leave Theresienstadt and make their way. So I can't answer that.
And once
I
they
do
left,
know,
did they go directly
as I
back
say,
home to get you?
thinking about it, I do know that they think my sister wouldn't have survived if she'd gone to camp earlier when my father was taken. So I can only assume she was just making it at that stage. For you to say, well, another couple of months would have been just too much. So that's reading, again, between the lines, or why they had that conclusion, is she mustn't have been in the best of health by the time the camp was liberated. And in fact, the statistics for children who survived Theresienstadt is terrible. There isn't one number as such, but it seems roughly only 1% of children sent there survived. So when I learned all these things, I thought I was so lucky, because although a lot of my family died, my parents and sister survived, and I wasn't an orphan.
Do you know how long it was between the time they were liberated and they were able to come collect you?
No, I'm sure that once they were able to come to Bratislava, I would have been handed over immediately by my aunt to them. I'm sure I was reunited as soon as that was possible, but I don't know when that was.
When the war ended, how many people in your family survived besides your parents and your sister?
Well, who were in Czechoslovakia at the time was only my uncle and aunt, my father's youngest brother, his wife, survived. The other members, I said, left before the war. So that was it.
When they did come to reunite the family, where did the family go from there as far as where they lived and what they did for a living, your parents?
Well, we lived in Bratislava, and my parents went back to earning their keep as lawyers, and my father continued to be heavily involved in Jewish affairs, as he had been from a very early age. I'm aware I didn't talk about the working group and his role and all of these things, but we can perhaps talk about that as well. But
Yes, let's go back to that first before
yeah.
they went in there. You said it was a well-known group and it was called the Working
Well,
Group. Can you describe what that
No,
was?
it was an informal group, so it didn't have a name or didn't have a structure, but there were 9 people involved in it. So it was an underground movement, effectively, who would promote any idea, however far-fetched they thought it might be, that they thought might help the Jewish community, not only in Slovakia, but outside as well. It's known subsequently as a working group, and sometimes the Working Group of Bratislava, it's been called. And it was effectively led, because as I say, it was no structure to it, by 2 people, Rabbi Dov Weismandel and a woman, Gizzy Fleischman, who to me is one of the unsung heroines of the war, because she had opportunity to leave Slovakia and join her daughters were in Tel Aviv. She could have joined them, but she made the decision to stay with her the Jewish community in the time of troubles, and it was enormously painful when I discovered that in 1944 she was picked up by the Gestapo and sent to Auschwitz with specific orders to be killed. Then that's.
Can you spell her name for us?
Gizzy is Gisi, and Fleischman would be Fleiss, I think Chman. I may have, no, I don't have it here. I have somewhere her name, sorry.
Did the group resume once the war was over?
No, it was just for purposes of the war. It was, interestingly, people who were not all in agreement with each other before the war. They were politically, or in Jewish terms, not together, let's say, or maybe even politically enemies in some ways, but who under the circumstances cooperated together to try to help the community. And I don't know if you want me to go into some of the things that the working group did, or just...
Yes, please.
Okay. I think the most important thing that they achieved was to stop the transportation of the Jews of Slovakia outside the country for almost 2 years, from October 42 to late September 44. And that was achieved by bribing the key German and Slovak officials involved. And one of the key people was SS officer Dieter Wisličený, who was nominally advisor to the Slovak government on Jewish affairs, but clearly the man calling the shots on behalf of Germany there. He was bribed. And having successfully stopped the deportations, the thought was maybe this could be extended throughout German-held territories. And the plan was proposed to Wisličený to that effect. In literature, it's become known as the Europa Plan. But Wisličený supposedly went to Berlin and discussed it and came back and said that Berlin demanded a lot of money to discuss the plan further. And the working group tried to raise the money, and Gizzy Fleischman actually traveled to Hungary, which had a much larger Jewish population than Slovakia, and at the time, a population that wasn't in trouble at the time, but subsequently, as we know, virtually wiped out. but they weren't able to raise the amount that was called for, and the plan was stillborn. And when I tried to research this and see, I'm not a major researcher and I don't have access to a lot of places. I didn't find anything that even said Wyslyceni went to Berlin and discussed it. So I don't know if he was just trying to feather his own nest or what. But in any case, that plan was stillborn. I know that they helped a number of Polish Jews in the very early stages of the invasion by Germany into Poland. A number of Jews escaped into Slovakia, and the working group helped them to escape into Hungary at that time. And another thing that I know was that there were a couple of young Slovak men who escaped from Auschwitz, made their way to Bratislava, and contacted someone on the working group. They were asked to draw up, write up as detailed a plan as they could, including a layout of Auschwitz. And that plan was smuggled to Switzerland, from where it was distributed to the international press. Now, there were rumors in the outside of the Nazi-held territory of death camps, but they were only rumors. So this was the first real evidence to the world of the existence of death camps and of Auschwitz. Now,
Did anything become of that
sorry?
plan? Did anything become of it? Or
Well,
do you know if
no.
somebody
The sad
stopped it
thing,
and did?
the sad thing is, there was a lot of controversy after the war as to why didn't the Allies bomb Auschwitz and the tracks to Auschwitz. And I tried to look into it and the pros and cons as to what happened. The Allies' story was that they felt the best way to save Jewish lives was by winning the war as quickly as possible. That was the story. So I take it on good faith that that was what was believed as to why.
The group that he belonged to, the working group, how many members were there?
It was 9 people altogether, as I say.
And was there a reason why that number was kept so low?
No, I don't, as I say, it was totally informal. I think there was just happened to be 9 people who all cooperated. It wasn't limited, or there wasn't a membership. It wasn't a group with a structure, a name, or, subsequently, as I say, in literature, it got this name of working group, but it was just people trying to cooperate together and do what they could. Now, I can tell you another story about my father, because a Rabbi Frieder, who was a member of the working group, kept a diary, and he died just after the war. He didn't die in the war, but just after the end of the war. And his brother, quite a long time later, produced a book that was mainly based on mainly the diaries of his brother. And so there's various times my father is in this, but there's one particular story which I usually tell at schools when I go to talk about my family's experiences during the war, because there's a story in this diary that President Tiso asked why my father was still walking around freely in Slovakia. Now, I mentioned that Tiso had some history with my father. Tiso actually had his parish in Banovce. And the first contact he had with my father was actually a benign contact, you could say, because my grandparents wanted their sons to go to university, And if you wanted to go to university in Czechoslovakia in those days, you had to go to a secondary school known as a gymnasium. And one of the things you had to know to get into a gymnasium was Latin. So who better to teach my father Latin than the Catholic priest of Bánovce, Joseph Tiso. And he obviously did a good enough job because my father did go on to university. But my father and his path crossed for a second time in the mid-1930s because Tiso was, as I say, he was a high-ranking officer in the Slovak People's Party in the mid-30s in a national election that was going on. And my father, although not a political man as such, was campaigning against the Slovak People's Party because of the fact that they were echoing all the Nazi language against the Jews. So this is why I think Tiso wanted to know why my father was still a free man in Slovakia. And the Minister of Interior, Sanomach, immediately issued orders for my father and the family to be sent to a camp. Now, I found it fascinating that in this highly anti-Semitic government of the day, there was a minister, Joseph Sivak, who actually did what he could to help the Jews, and he maintained contact with the working group. He tipped my father off, and my father went into hiding. And then the diaries pick up the story a couple of months later when he says, I've been trying to get the orders against Winterstein repealed or, dropped. It was very difficult because it had been Tiso who'd raised the whole issue. And Sivak tried as a minister to do away with it, but wasn't able. So Rabbi Frieder asked Sivak to speak to Tiso and see if he could get him to rescind the order. Now the diaries say that Tiso wouldn't agree to do that, but he said he wouldn't take any measures to help my father, but he wouldn't oppose any measures taken that might help him. He sort of dropped his interest. And so the diary says, so there was hope. And a few days after that, the order was rescinded and my father was able to rejoin my mother and sister. Yeah.
To pick up where earlier we left off, when your family became a family unit again after the war, you indicated that you settled in Bratislava, right? Again?
Yes, we lived in Bratislava.
And how long did you live there?
We
after
lived
the
there.
war?
We lived there till I understand something like December 1948, somewhere like that.
Do you have any memories of that time?
Oh, I have childhood memories, and they're quite happy, normal childhood memories of because we lived in a building where there was a toy shop just at the bottom of it for a child, heaven, and I can remember being with my uncle and aunt and cousin in their home, and they had a sand pit, and us playing in their sand pit, and I have all these happy kind of memories of that time. I was a happy boy, apparently.
Do you have any memories of interactions between sister and yourself at that time? Because she was about 7 years older than you?
No, she's six years and a bit. She was 7 years when she was taken to camp, but she's 6 and a bit years older than me. I don't remember. She was much older than me. I don't remember what our relationship quite was. I think she was very much a big sister to me, always looking after little brother. certainly
Did your
from
parents
when I have
both
memories
go
of her,
back to
that
the
was.
legal field, both of
Sorry?
them?
They were both, yes, they went back to that. And my father, as I say, was busy with Jewish matters, of which the thorniest, most difficult issue was restitution of Jewish property to the survivors coming back, because other people, I mean, particularly when you talk about homes, other people were living in these homes. And that was a very difficult issue.
Did they try and get back to the home that they had before the war?
Uh, I know we weren't in the home we were in before the home. I don't know what happened in that. I don't know the story about that. But we
Do you
weren't
know if your
in the
parents were
home.
able to recover any of their belongings?
Very little.
And after you were living in Bratislava, where did you go after that?
We moved, well, we became refugees. We left because the communists took over in a coup in February 48, the government. And my father ended up briefly in prison. And my mother said, I've had enough. We've had the Nazis, now the communists. I'm going to leave with the children if you don't want to leave. Because my father was a bit reluctant to leave at that stage. But he then agreed to leave. So we were refugees at that stage. But my father did get papers to go to Australia, but they had no real interest to go there. They didn't know anybody there. And it was the end of the world, particularly at that time. Even today, it's a very long flight there. But my father ran into Dr. Nahum Goldman in Paris. And Goldman was one of the founders, and he was the president of the World Jewish Congress. And he knew my father because my father was on congresses after the war. He was one of the representatives of Czechoslovakian Jewry. So Goldman knew him. And when Goldman said, what are you doing? He said, well, nothing. We're refugees. So he said, I want you to go to London. You're working for us, and I'll tell you what I want you to do. So that's how we ended up in London. And my father was sent to Brazil on what he thought was a relatively short-term, 2-3 year sort of assignment, which turned out to be an assignment for the rest of his life, actually. And we followed him about 6 months after he went. So somewhere like early 1950, we moved to Brazil, which is where I grew up.
You were approximately how old when you moved there?
I was 6 years old.
Do you have any memories of leaving Europe and going to Brazil?
Oh, yes. Yeah. By then I had memories. I have memories of the first school I went to was in Kilburn in London. I have a few memories of those days. We lived in a boarding house, and I remember that I hated the food and would often throw it under a dresser that they had when someone wasn't looking. And apparently, at some point, they moved the dresser to clean or paint or whatever, and discovered all this food I'd been throwing there. But
were there other Jewish families in that same place that you were at that were displaced?
I don't know who was there. I know the only thing I know was that I had another Czech boy as a friend, and that my parents were very worried that I wasn't learning English, and I had to start school in September. And so they sent me to the summer camp to learn English. And I came back after 3 weeks, and I spoke English, and I said I didn't recognize Slovak. When they spoke, I said, I don't know what you're saying. Now, I have a bad memory, but even I don't think I can forget a language, particularly my mother tongue. in 3 weeks. So my own analysis of it is that I associated it with bad things because children can unwittingly be a bit cruel. And because I dressed in funny clothes for the English and I couldn't speak, or when I started to speak, we obviously spoke funnily for them, I think I desperately wanted to belong. And so the minute I could speak English, and I just wanted to belong, and all of that in my mind must have been bad stuff, and I locked it away. Sadly, I would love to have it now. I wish I had it. I think every language is a gift. So.
When you went, Uri, to that camp, do you recall going? Do you recall what the camp was like?
I have no idea what it was like, but I learned English there.
Did your sister, was she sent to a similar
No,
camp
my
for her to learn
sister,
English?
my sister spoke English because she had already spent quite a bit of time in England. She had needed plastic surgery because she was born with, it was a very poor forceps delivery that damaged one ear and her jaw a bit. And so she went to England when we were still living in Bratislava to have some surgery there by the man who's known as the father of modern plastic surgery in England, Sir Giles. I forget what his first name is. But unfortunately, he took the case because it was something different for him. He was willing to take the case because my parents didn't have the kind of money to pay him for the, she went through a series of operations. So she was in England quite a bit.
Were the operations successful?
Unfortunately, not entirely. They were to some extent, but not entirely. And he said, I better stop. She better wait until she's an adult, and then she can try again if she wants at that stage. But yeah.
When your father was transferred to Rio in Brazil, did the company take care of getting you there? And did you fly or did you take a ship? Do you know how you got there?
I know how we went. I don't know how he went. He probably flew, but we went by ship. Also to take all our belongings, etc. Mm-hmm. And I still remember the name of the ship was the Highland Chieftain. And I had a great time on the ship. It was good trip.
And when you got to Rio, your father was there,
yeah.
And had he set up a home for you when you did get there?
Not at the beginning. At the beginning, we lived with another Jewish family who were kind enough to give us some space in their home. They had a very nice, huge home. And they allowed us a bit of time till my father did get our own flat.
And when you did set up a home on your own, your sister and yourself, you were enrolled in school there?
Yes. Initially, very briefly, we went to a Brazilian school. But my parents really wanted us to go to the American school because, as I say, they thought we were only going to be in Brazil for 2 or 3 years, and therefore an education in English would be much more portable. And so they sent us to the American school in Rio. And so although we stayed in the American school.
Right through completing that education?
Yeah, I did. Apart from 1 year when I left, but came back to the school. Yeah.
Did your mother continue her law practice there?
She did actually continue, but not as an official lawyer, because she wasn't qualified to be a lawyer in Brazil. But Germany passed in 1948 a bill Wiedergutmachung, to make good again, it was called, to the only way they could try to make up for what people had suffered was financially. But in order to have your claim recognized, you had to submit a claim in a German court. It had to go through a court system because, of course, from a German point of view, they didn't want just everybody saying, oh, yes, I was in the camp, I was whatever. So they wanted it to go through the courts. So there were quite a few Jewish survivors in Brazil now. And most of them were very poor, in fact, and they needed help in order to do this. Now, my mother worked for an NGO who provided the help to them she would put together the cases and send it to a lawyer in Frankfurt who would take it to court.
Did your family receive any restitution?
Yes, they did. My parents and my sister. My mother made no claim for me, which she regretted subsequently, but she didn't.
In the home that your parents set up, were you within a Jewish neighborhood, or was it mixed? Was it?
In Brazil, there was no Jewish neighborhood, really. The numbers weren't big enough for that. It was a city of, I don't know at the time, certainly at least 6 million people or so, and the number of Jews was at most 50,000.
Once you moved to Brazil, was there any attempt or desire to then belong to a synagogue, which you had not previously done?
No, we belonged to a synagogue, and I was bar mitzvahed there at our synagogue. There,
okay.
Yeah.
And did you attend regularly, your family, or was it just high holidays?
Did we? Sorry?
Did you attend that synagogue regularly, or just for the high holidays?
As a boy, I went to Cheder, the Sunday school, let's call it, until I was bar mitzvahed. After that, I didn't attend. And I only went on high holy days with my father. I would go with him. But otherwise, we weren't particularly religious. I think we would do a Seder at Passover time, but we didn't keep most of the things that an Orthodox Jew would keep, and we didn't keep kosher.
And so you get to Brazil, and your family has set up a new home and a new life, thinking it was going to be temporary. Both your parents are working, and you're in school. And how many years did you end up staying in Brazil?
Well, I was in Brazil until I was 17, with 1 year. When I was 14, I went to the States for a year because I became very friendly with a boy at my school, and his parents invited me to come and spend a year with him, which as a parent myself I find amazing, that you take responsibility for another boy. And they had 3 sons, so they were taking a fourth to be responsible for. So I spent a year with them. But otherwise, I was there till I was 17. Then I went to university in the States, and I did 4 years undergraduate, then I did 2 years graduate, and then I did a year where a very American sort of idea was a fellowship for students from developing countries to spend a year in American industry before they went home. So I got this fellowship, and I had a year, fantastic year, in the States before I went back to Brazil. Then I worked in Brazil for 3 years before I left.
To touch back on the year that you spent with your friend, what state were you in?
Sorry, what?
What state did they live?
Oh, where did I go? We went to Waco, Texas. Yeah.
And do you recall what that was like, that
Oh,
experience, the
fantastic. It was
culture?
amazing. This was small town America where suddenly I'm introduced to all these homes with lovely lawns, grass, without fences, everything. You know, kids could just go up and down the neighborhood on their bicycles, etc. And it was a lovely existence. And it was so laid back that at that time, um, the family even allowed me to drive the car. We were 14, and then we drove the car. So,
And your English was quite good by then, obviously. Did you ever have
oh,
an accent or no?
I
A British?
when I went there, no, I presumably went to Brazil with a British accent. I must have had a British accent because it was the only English I knew was from London. But I think as a child, you very quickly pick up accents. So I think in the school, I very quickly picked up an American accent. And in fact, when I went to Texas, when I came home, my mother, for first couple of weeks, couldn't understand me. I had such a Texan drawl at this stage, till that quickly went. But I had an American accent, so when I went at 17 to the States, people wouldn't believe me when I said I wasn't an American. It wasn't just that I spoke like an American. It was that I understood America. I understood how things worked. You know, I'd been living it. So it was difficult for people to accept. I sometimes had to show my passport, say I'm not.
Are you aware that when your parents made the decision, allowed you to go to Texas, out of the country to another
Yeah.
country with this friend of yours, if there was any difficulty in that decision, given the fact that they had already had to give you up once when you were a baby?
No, I thought my parents wouldn't allow me to go. When it was raised, I was very excited about the idea. I loved the idea. And I prepared all the reasons why I thought this would be very good for my future. The thing is, my parents had already thought that themselves. They thought America was the greatest country, the leader of the West, to whom they looked for salvation against communism, which was they had run from. And so they thought this would be very good for me. So they I didn't need to convince them at all. Maybe they were just happy to have me off their hands.
While you were growing up in Rio, did you or your family experience any type of anti-Semitism?
I did not experience any. I can't say whether the rest of my family ever had any incidents, not that I was aware of. And Brazil, certainly at that time, seemed to be very free. I mean, I'm sure there were people who were anti-Semitic. It was first of all, 94% Catholic country at the time, something like that. And within Catholicism, it carries a certain amount of anti-Semitic stories, etc., that unfortunately carries. But in Brazil, it didn't seem to be, certainly wasn't a problem that we encountered. I know the Jewish community is very open. It doesn't try to hide itself there. And on like Hanukkah now, they would put up a big menorah in a central square, say, and hand out candies and whatever. So, you know, quite openly being Jewish. So I never experienced any problems of anti-Semitism. In fact, the truth is...
Did your parents have a vibrant or any type of relationship, social relationship within your community, and did they know of anybody who also survived the Holocaust?
Well, from both their works, my father as the envoy of the World Jewish Congress to Brazil, that was what he remained all those years, was therefore heavily involved with the Jewish community. and so we socialized a lot with a lot of people as well, and my mother likewise. So there was now, as far as survivors go, because more, probably more even than my father, my mother's job was directly working with the Jewish survivors that were in Rio. So a lot of these people were coming to our home. And I got, a number of them became friends of the family, and I knew them. Yeah.
As you were getting to be a little older, Uri, did you become more and more aware of the war, what was behind it, and did your family ever talk to you about what that was like for them, what it was
Right.
like for them to give you to this woman, or anything?
Right.
Like your mother, your father, your sister? Was there any dialogue over the course of the years when
Right.
you were growing up where that came up?
My family, I think typically of survivors, didn't talk about their experiences, basically. My sister told me this one story about the magical puppet show she saw. My mother, when she thought I was old enough, as best I can remember, I was 8, 9 years old, in that kind of age bracket roughly, told me stories about what happened to the family, what happened to them that I was talking about. Because she said she didn't want me to learn things from other sources. She thought she better be the first one. But other than telling me a limited amount of stories, they didn't talk about it at all. And my father, the only thing I ever remember of him telling me was that the working group would seize on any idea, however far-fetched, to see if it could help the community. That was the only conversation I remember about the war. So they didn't talk about what their experiences were, what they discussed about me and giving me away. None of that. That was just a story that I was given away.
Did you know that you were? Did you know at some point? Did somebody tell you? Did they tell you? Oh, you need to know this is what we did. Did you know you were given away?
Not till my mother told me. I didn't know till my mother told me. Well, she told me, as I say, probably when I was around 8, 9 years old. She
Your
told
mom
me
did,
that
your
this
mother.
was, yes, my mother. So she told me about the family, family, I'm putting it, I know it's a family, but about the woman that they gave me to, and about the fact that this one story in the forest that she told me about, and the fact that I was then given to this Sudeten German woman. But she didn't tell me anything about discussions with my father or what they thought, nothing.
And in telling you that story, did she indicate to you at all what that feeling was like for her, or was there?
No, they never showed any of what they felt. And it was only as an adult, when I started to think about it, I thought, I suffered as a teenager. I suffered for a brief period of time what's known as survivor's guilt. Yeah, when a lot of people die, maybe a natural disaster or something else. In this case, the Holocaust. As a teenager, I had this thing: why did my 2 cousins die, and I didn't? A typical survivor guilt issue, for which, of course, there's no answer. And eventually, somehow, I moved on with my life. I moved on with my life so much that for most of my life, I didn't recognize myself as a survivor, and I didn't think that I had been personally touched by it, personally. I knew I hadn't been traumatized, is what I felt, right? That was... My family had gone through all of this, and all the other people. But as an adult, when I thought about it, and I thought about my father in particular, and I thought, here was a man who dedicated, since his youth, so much of his time and effort to try to help the Jewish community, and yet had been unable to save his own mother and sisters, etc., etc. This must have been a terrible weight. Yet he never showed it to me. He never talked about it. He never showed it. They were only focused with me on the future, as I say. So I don't know, but I cannot help but think it must have been hugely traumatic for them. But they did not share it with me and spared me that.
Were there times when did you ever think to ask questions, and if you did, your parents just kind of shut that down?
No, to my shame, I feel I should have asked more questions. I think to let myself partially off the hook, I think part of it was that you're focused on the future. I certainly, but I think I was very aware that this was a very touchy area. And having said that my parents didn't talk about it, I was living with the Holocaust because my mother was bringing stories from her clients and discussing with my father issues and difficult and problems and how she was thinking of handling this particular problem and presenting this. So I was living with this quite often at the dinner table, So it was very strange, but not my family's. It wasn't there. And so
How about your sister?
she didn't, as I say, she didn't talk about it at all. Just this one
She didn't
story,
talk.
nothing else.
Did she ever relate to you that she remembers when they gave you away, or anything that happened to her during the Holocaust?
When I was doing my talks at schools, after doing quite a few of them, I plucked up my courage to ask her, would you feel able, I'm doing these talks, would you feel able to tell me any things that you remember, but if it's very difficult, it's okay, But I thought she'd become a different person in the sort of the second half of her life from what she was when she was younger, when I was living with her. I thought she seems to be more able probably to handle it, and she was. She was ready to talk. So she told me some of the things I've actually mentioned. But she has also very limited memory. She was only 7, she doesn't remember things. And she remembers 1 or 2 things differently from what my mother told me. And I thought between what you remember as a 7-year-old and what our mother remembers, I think I trust our mother's memory better on it, But she added a little bit, but not a huge amount. And
Would you consider when you were growing up in Brazil that you lived a middle-class life, or
a middle-class
what
life.
would you have?
Very much a
Middle-class life.
middle-class life. Yeah.
Did you have a large group of friends, or?
No, I didn't have a big group of friends. I was pretty much I was very introverted, very shy. And so I only had a small circle of friends.
Mm-hmm. And what made you decide?
Now this was
living in
my issue,
different
not
life?
their, not the kids were, not that the kids were nasty. It was I recognize it was me.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Did you feel different from your friends, or just that was your personality?
Well, I certainly, I knew I didn't fit in. I knew I wasn't like everyone. I came from a very different background and history that I was aware of. Yeah. But
Did anybody ask you about that? Any of your friends say?
no.
No. Did your parents maintain their accents?
Yes, my parents spoke English with an accent.
And did they ever speak Slovak between the two of them as you were growing up?
No. This is why I lost Slovak. If they had spoken Slovak at home, I would have kept it. I would have eventually recognized it again, let's say. But their language was actually German, because when they were growing up, and if you went to a gymnasium and then university, these were in German. So German was their culturally the dominant language. If you were educated, that's what you spoke. So they found it a little bit difficult after the end of the war that you couldn't speak German in public in Czechoslovakia. This was a dangerous thing to do.
Was there any Yiddish
They didn't,
incorporated
as far
into
as I
their
know,
German?
they didn't speak Yiddish. They spoke German.
German. What I mean is just even certain words that they were used.
We all have some Yiddish words.
Yes, we
You
do.
know, I think even a lot of people in the States who aren't Jewish have some of the Yiddish
Yes.
words. So
Did they continue? Did you grow up with any ethnic foods that were from your homeland?
Oh,
From Slovak?
yes, definitely.
You did.
The cuisine at home was very much Central European.
And do
and
you
my
remember what kind of
father-
food your mother would make?
Yeah, I remember for my father, first of all, no dinner was a dinner without soup. So it didn't matter what the weather was, whether it was 100 degrees outside or whatever, you're going to have soup. Although we did have a couple of cold fruit soups for those days, so we did have some. But it was very much, Central European food. So, I'm particularly hooked on desserts, unfortunately, and poppy seed, for example. There were several poppy seed type desserts that my mother would make, and other desserts which are now lost to me because nobody makes them. You know, my wife does make poppy seed, though she did learn to do that.
Poppy seed cake or muffins? Or?
It's a poppy seed roll, so it has a lot of poppy seed in it. Or it's not what you normally have as a poppy seed cake. It has a base, and on the top of it is a thick layer of poppy seed. It's wonderful.
Growing up in your home, did your parents have help in the home, whether it was a nanny or a maid?
We had a maid, middle class in Brazil when in the 50s. You had a maid, and she cooked, and she cleaned, and she lived in.
She lived in, yes.
We
And
live in maid.
did you have a good relationship? Do you recall her?
Well, there was more than one. There were
okay.
two or three when I was growing up. I remember one that frightened me when I was probably our first one, maybe. Because there is a African-based religion, as a mixture of African religion with Christianity in Brazil, which she was into that, and she frightened me with it. You know, there's a spiritualism, and she was shaking and all of this. I was frightened, so I remember that. But the next maid was very good. She was very nice.
So did your sister go to university?
Yes, she went to Barnard in New York. Yeah.
So she as well went to the States for her
She went-
education. And
yeah.
was that a decision that was made along with your parents? Or did she,
Oh,
how
no,
did
our
she know about
parents
Barnard and South
our
America?
parents had to agree. They was going to cost them money. But our parents were very much wanted us to go to university in the States. As I say, for them, it was the golden Medina, the golden state. So they wanted us to go to a good university in the States.
How did they find out about a school such as Barnard for her?
Well, no, we went to the American school. So at the American school, you had someone when you were coming to the stage who could advise, counsel the kids on what was most appropriate for them. So they would know a whole range of universities, etc., depending on what they thought was suitable for the child, or counsel
How
them
old
on
were you
other
when
things.
I'm sorry. How
Sorry?
old were you, Uri, when she left for college?
When she left, I must have been 12 when she
Do
left.
you recall any kind of feeling of her being gone from the home or in your
Oh yeah,
parents' behavior?
I felt much loneliness of not having her there. Yeah,
And
but
are you aware of
happy
how well
for
she
her.
did there and if she
I was happy for her. Yeah,
was happy
yeah.
there?
I think overall she was happy. Yeah,
Do you know
and
what her education was? What was her major?
I think it was English, but I'm not sure.
Did she come back home after graduation?
She came home afterwards. I don't know how long she stayed in Brazil. I don't think very long. She went to France and studied French, and I think was in some sort of short courses at Sorbonne or something like that as well. Spent about a year in France. And then she went to Israel, and she lived in Jerusalem. And she worked there in a travel agency. I don't know how many years. She was there for quite a while. I went and visited, I think it was after I graduated from undergraduate school. I went and she took me around Israel on a 3-day trip, seeing a lot of sights, etc., and we had a good time. And
Did
then,
your parents ever go back there? Did your parents go to visit her? And did your
well,
father ever see his?
oh yes, my parents visited Israel a number of times, and my father saw his brother, yeah, and so on. Both my sister and I stayed at times with both our uncles and aunts because the youngest brother who survived under false papers, he and his wife and children escaped from Czechoslovakia. I think it was 1966, and went to Israel. So we stayed with both uncles and aunts on trips and spent time with them, and my parents would visit. And my father's dream was to retire in Israel. And sadly, the year he was retiring, he died of a heart attack. So he never got to retire. But we took his body to Israel, and he was buried in the cemetery where his brother is also buried in Tel Aviv. Yeah.
Did those family members know that your mother and father had given you to somebody as a baby to protect you during the Holocaust?
Yes, they would have known. And as I say, my aunt was the one who picked me up. So she knew exactly where I was. Yeah.
And during those visits, did that ever come up, the Holocaust, the discussion of it and what happened?
No, never discussed with them either. My aunt talked to me about her experiences under the communists, but not really very much about during World War II.
So you then finished school. Would you have considered yourself a good student when you were in in high school?
Was I what?
Were you a good student?
I was a good student. I mean, I don't think I could get into the Ivy League without being a good student. So yeah, I was.
So you went off to university. You went to Penn.
Yeah.
Did your parents ever visit you there?
My father visited me once because he was there on work, so we had a chance to be together. Otherwise, they didn't visit, and I got to go back to Brazil after 2 years. In the middle, I went to Brazil, and then at the end of my undergraduate, I was home again for a bit.
Were you homesick at school?
No, I wasn't homesick.
And how did you find being in the States and being on your own as a young
I
adult
loved
and
it.
being
I
at
loved it.
college?
I was 17 years old, and suddenly, totally on my own. I loved it.
And did any of your friends that you met there know of your, just from you talking to them, know of this experience and this journey that you took from Slovakia to Brazil to the States?
Yes, people. I know people knew, but I didn't tell them a lot. I didn't talk a lot about the Holocaust, or not something I did. I know that they knew certain things because I still have it somewhere. A girlfriend of the time did me a birthday card where she did 4 soldiers with 4 flags and 4 tick boxes and said, "Tick the box, that's you." Something to that effect. Because what she was saying is, who are you? Yeah, I know you're Czech, I know you're Brazilian, I know you. So it was kind of like, who are you really?
And did those, what they thought, come from any conversations or just here and there bits and pieces as kids do talk about things, but they never really kind of drill down on them?
No,
That they
it
knew?
was never anything drilled down. People didn't pick up on it.
Did you know of any other Holocaust survivors while you were at Penn?
No, at Penn I didn't know any.
You didn't.
There were a lot of Jewish kids there, but they were all American. All of them were American. I wasn't aware
And
of any.
what year did you graduate from Penn?
65 as an
Were your
undergraduate.
parents able Were your parents able to come to your graduation?
No, they weren't there. And 67
then
I graduated.
You then went home to Brazil.
Yeah.
And how long were you there before you went back for your MBA?
Well, no, it was just a brief time because it was just a summer. Because I started my MBA straight away. So I did 6 years together, sort of.
Okay.
Yeah.
When you went back for the summer, how did you find your parents? Because now they have 2 children that are out of the country and living their lives. Did you find that their lives were okay and going along fine?
Yes, at that stage, yes. When I came back after in 1968, then I found my father looking not so well, not so healthy, and looking older. I suddenly, until then, my parents were the same. How people don't seem to age or whatever. My father had had a pretty severe heart attack in Europe, in fact, on a trip in Europe.
After the war?
No, in the 60s. That's why
After the war. Okay.
until that trip, my parents seemed the same always. They seemed good. But I realized that heart attack had had a big impact on his health.
And so you go back and you go to Wharton and you graduate from Wharton in what year?
67.
And from there, what did you do?
Well, then I did the fellowship for a year, where I lived in New York. Yeah.
How did you like that experience?
Couldn't get much better. You're 21, you're single, and you have money in your pocket. What could be nicer? I love New York.
Where did you live in New York and where did you take your fellowship?
I lived in Manhattan. But the company I was working for, their headquarters were in Stamford, I think it was, Connecticut. But they had offices also in New York, somewhere in New York. So I did part of it in New York and part of it in Stamford. I was doing the opposite commute. You'd have thousands of people streaming in to New York City in the morning, and I going on the train with a few people the other direction. Yeah.
And as you're coming of age at this time, at that point yet, had you had any thoughts or concerns or curiosity or even lost memories of the Holocaust? Or were you just going along as a young
No,
man plotting your future?
I think at that stage the Holocaust was totally out of my life, kind of. And I wasn't even living with all the people coming and telling stories or etc. I didn't, so it wasn't present. And I think it's part of what allowed me for so much of my life to forget that I was a survivor.
Mm-hmm.
You know, it needed a wake up
did
moment.
your parents ever able to come visit you in New York?
No, and that year in New York, I didn't see them in New York. I
And
traveled
were
to New
you
York.
and your sister able to keep in consistent contact with them, given the
Oh,
times
I was
not
in
electronic
contact.
like we have now, while you were not living at
I
home?
was in contact. I wrote home every week. When I went to university, I wrote every week. Sometimes it was one short paragraph, but every week I wrote. Yeah.
And after that internship in New York, then what was the next step in your journey?
Then I went back to Brazil, and I got a job in Rio. I ended up working for a small company run by an American. He owned the company, which was industrial market research work. Very interesting because it introduced a whole range of different problems, and you meet lots of people when you're doing that kind of work. And also,
Mm-hmm.
I traveled. I traveled around Brazil a lot, and even on the job to the States. Yeah.
And did you live at home or live on your own when you went back to
No,
Rio?
I was living at home then. I lived
And
at
did
home.
you ever learn to speak Portuguese?
Sorry?
Did you ever learn to speak Portuguese?
Did I?
Did you ever learn to speak the language,
Did I?
Portuguese?
Oh, yes, I learned Portuguese because, first of all, in the American school, you had a Portuguese lesson every week. All years, you had Portuguese all through the school. And I'm living in a society all those years, so the maids didn't speak English. You had to speak Portuguese to them. My friends, when I was a boy, in the first building we lived in, for example, I was very good friends with two boys my age in the building. We played all the time. They didn't speak English, so I very quickly learned Portuguese and could speak with them.
I may have asked you this before, but within the family home, the four of you spoke what language?
At home, we spoke English mainly. My parents spoke German together.
Mm-hmm.
My mother actually spoke a mixture to us, if I think about it, that she would throw in whatever word came first. So it might be half English, a little bit of German, and some Portuguese, all in the same sentence. It was quite amusing.
And from them speaking German together, did you and your sister ever pick up any, like, in other words, could you understand it but not speak it?
I picked up what I call my kitchen German, I call it. It was a very basic level of German. I never learned it properly, and I don't think I wanted to. But you can't help hearing and picking up a certain level of it. And when I met the son of the family I was hidden by, when I met him in 2019, the only language we had in common was German. It was very limited, made conversation difficult, but we kind of managed to some degree.
Yes, and we're almost to that point there to talk about that. With that international company, then what was your next step?
It wasn't an international company. It was a Brazilian. It was a local small company.
Okay, I'm
It
sorry.
was an American who owned it, though.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So after that, I met my wife-to-be in Rio because she was working there She was sent by the British Council on a 2-year contract there. And I met her when she had about 6 or 7 months left of her contract or something like that. And when her contract ended, she returned to Bristol, her hometown. And I, in the meantime, had decided that I would do a postgraduate diploma course in England. So about 4 months later, I came to England and I studied at University College London for a year. Development planning for developing countries is what I got a diploma in.
What was the circumstances under which you were able to meet her in Rio?
Well, the circumstances were that where I worked, we had a secretary. I say English secretary, but I have to say she was English, and she was there as an English secretary. And I was quite friendly with her because, of course, almost everyone else working in the company were Brazilians. Most of them didn't speak English even, and we could speak English, and we naturally got on very well. And she said to me one day, "A friend's coming for lunch. Would you like to join us?" And I say, luck plays a big role in life as well. I could easily have been too busy, but as it was, I wasn't. I could go. So I said, yeah. And the friend turned out to be the woman who's now my wife. So that's how we met.
And now you go to the UK, you go to London, you take this more university education. And when did you and Margaret, when did you get married?
Well, my wife came to London also and got herself a job. Mm-hmm. So we were in London, but we weren't yet really together totally. She was living with a couple of other girls. I was living with some other people, but we were going out together. And then when I finished, I must have got into a mentality of the perpetual student. So I thought, what am I going to do with my life now? And I thought, I'll go do a PhD in Israel. Because my family in Haifa had said, you don't need any Hebrew. Everything's in English. So I thought, okay, I'll go to Israel and I'll do this. So I went to Israel and started a PhD. Biggest mistake in my life, probably, that one. First of all, everything was in Hebrew. So I very quickly found out, I had enough Hebrew to ask directions somewhere or ask for a cup of coffee or whatever, that sort of level of Hebrew. So I then quickly started to think about it and think, I don't even know if I really want this, because I was aware that a PhD was a double-edged sword. There were a lot of jobs that would not be open to someone who had a PhD, because the companies would think you were too much of an egghead, too much of an academic or whatever. So I thought, is this really a good idea? And so I decided to drop it. And in the meantime, Marnie came and joined me in Israel. And I then tried to find a job there. But the kind of things I had been working in, people said there, look, we're a very small country. We don't do any of that. We don't need that. We don't do it. And the kind of jobs that I got offered just were not for me. So in the end, we decided to try our luck in London. And we came to London in August 1973. And we got married here in London in October 73.
And how long had you been going out until you got married?
Well, I'd known her for over 3 years by then. Yeah.
And what's your wife's full name and her date of birth?
Her passport name is Mary. She has a long name, but Mary Winterstein. Let's stick with that part. Mary Angela Veronica Winterstein. That's her full name. But she's known by everyone as Marnie. That's what she calls herself. So other than official documents, everyone calls her Marnie. Where she worked, they call her Marnie, etc. Yeah.
Did she convert?
She did. Yeah.
And was that something you wanted to do or she offered to do?
That was something she decided.
Okay.
What she knew is that my Jewish identity was very important to me, and that having Jewish children would be very important to me.
Mm-hmm.
But I never asked her because I feel it's something that the person has to decide for themselves, that it would feel pressured to say,
Mm-hmm.
I'll only marry you if you become Jewish, or it didn't feel right. So I never raised it. I never said it. And she was the one who one day surprised me and said, I'm going to become Jewish. And she said...
And how did her family feel about that?
They were really good about it. Her father was Irish, Irish Catholic, but lapsed as far as his Catholicism went. Her mother came from the Welsh Valleys, but they were both wonderful. I thought they would freak out. You're going to marry, not bad enough you're marrying a Brazilian, South American, but a Jew on top of it, yeah. But they were great. They were very good and very supportive. Yeah, we got on very well.
Were your parents and your sister able to meet her or come to the wedding?
My father was already dead at the point I met her. My father had already died. So my mother and sister did meet her and know her. And, well, they've known her all the rest of their lives then because...
And they were accepting of her as well and were happy about the union.
They were happy, about us.
Just to jump back a little bit, how was your mother after your father passed away because it was so sudden? How did she move on or take care of herself?
She was a very strong woman, and so she continued with life as it was. She didn't fall apart or anything. The one thing is she wanted that my father be buried in Israel because that had been his dream. And I think she felt a bit responsible that he hadn't gone to Israel when we left Czechoslovakia. But she had said there was the War of Independence was underway in 1948. And she had said, look, I can't take any more. We've had all these years and I need some quiet. So they didn't go to Israel then. So I think she felt a little bit guilty probably about it and felt he should be at least buried in Israel. So we took him there.
Did your sister stay in Israel? And did she get married?
She didn't get married. She lived in Israel, as I say, for several years. And then was it a mistake or not? I don't know. She came on a visit to Brazil, which was supposed to be maybe a year, and then to go back. And I think what happened is probably that she liked the job she got. It was a good job, and she just kind of stayed on. I'm guessing now what happened. I never asked her why she didn't go back, but she didn't. She stayed in Rio. And,
was there any time you had a conversation with her where she, especially living in Israel after the war, where she herself met other survivors, other women or men that were her age when they were there?
I have no idea of her relationship with other people on the issue, but given that I know she doesn't basically talk about it, etc., I suspect it wasn't something she was used to doing. I'm
So
sure
your
she will have
wife,
known
you and your
people.
wife get married,
Yeah.
and you settle in London, and you're starting your
London.
career. And I would imagine you go on to have family. And if you could tell me the names and date of
Okay.
births
We,
of
we,
your
we,
children.
we had 3 children. So Jessica was born in October 1975, 6th of October 1975. Daniel was born 3rd of June 1977. And Ilana was born 18th of July 1982.
They are all married.
They were all married. My oldest daughter's husband, unfortunately, died just a little before, 3 months before their first and only child was due to be born. Yeah.
Did your daughter remarry?
No.
And what's your granddaughter's name from her daughter's name?
Granddaughter's name is Libby.
And
Libby.
when was Libby born?
She was born on the 17th of April 2008.
And Daniel's wife's name?
Rebecca. Also, we all call
And
her Rebecca.
children?
They have 2 boys. There's Joshua, who was born on the 8th of July 2011. He's 12 years old now, yeah. And Adam was born on the 9th of September 2000, must be 2013. Yeah, he's 10.
And
yeah.
your youngest, Ilana, who was her husband, or who is her husband, excuse me?
His name is Aaron. And they have 2 children also. Neri, spelled Neri, was born on the, God, I think I've got the date wrong now. Now I'm going blank, 3rd or 5th of April.
Yes, 3 April.
3 April, I think. 2000
14.
and no, it must be must be 2015 actually, because she will be 10. She isn't 10 yet. She's 9.
Okay.
So she's
And
trying to remember. Ezra was the 25th of May, 2016 then.
And Marnie, you raised your children within the Jewish faith,
Yes.
within a synagogue?
Yeah. They went to Heder, to our synagogue. They had bar and bat mitzvahs. Yes, they all went.
And did you find yourself, now that in your adult life, being married, having children, that you reconnected with your Jewish faith insofar as being associated with the synagogue and being there consistently?
It hasn't made me more religious. It has connected me to the Jewish community, but I was always connected in some way to the Jewish. I mean, I always recognized myself as a Jew, and it was never an issue for me. That was 100%.
And obviously your grandchildren are being raised within the faith.
They're being raised in the faith, and in one case they're being raised in both faiths, you could say.
In both what?
They're being raised both in the Jewish faith and the Christian faith.
Oh, okay.
They're getting,
Okay.
and as adults, they can make up their own minds if they want either or none or whatever they want. But they're both part of their identities, and I think it will be there as part of their
Do all of your
identities.
children and grandchildren live within a good, close enough to you where you can see them consistently?
We do a lot of traveling because
You do.
our son and their family live in Edinburgh. Our youngest daughter and family are now in Amsterdam. And only our eldest daughter and granddaughter are in London, but even in London, they're an hour away. But we see a lot more, of course, of them than of the others. But we do travel quite a bit to them, and they come to us as well. So we try to see each other at least half a dozen times a year. And we've so far always taken a week's holiday as a family where we all get together.
Oh, how nice.
Whether that's going to be possible going forward, because as they grow older, there are all kinds of new commitments, and also the school years are not quite the same. You know, there are problems.
What do they call you and your wife? What do the grandchildren call you and your wife?
Well, I'm called Grandpa by my eldest granddaughter and by my two grandsons in Edinburgh. But I'm called Vovô, which is the Brazilian for grandfather, but by my two grandchildren in Amsterdam, because their mother did learn Portuguese. And so when they were small, she decided I should be Vovô
Okay.
for that. And my wife is Nana. She's Nana to all of them. She's their Nana.
Okay.
Yeah.
Are they, any of them aware, your children or their spouses or your grandchildren, that you are a Holocaust survivor?
Oh, they all know. I do these talks, so they all, I mean, I told my children some of the history anyway, because having an aunt and a grandmother while my mother was still alive, they had to know something about that history. So I did tell them something about it, but I didn't dwell on it. I told them, and that was it. My eldest daughter, as a teenager, made a huge collection of books about the Holocaust. So clearly that had a huge impact with her. But when I started to do the talks at schools, my youngest daughter immediately said, "Oh, I'm going to come. I want to listen. I want to hear." And I said, "You can't come. It's closed. It's a school. It's not just open to anybody, you know. But I will tell all of you everything I'm telling the school." So I have told all of them all the story. Now, the grandchildren don't know all the story. They're still, some of them are quite young. My eldest granddaughter, on the other hand, organized for me to come and speak at her school. She wanted me to come when she was 9 years old. I said, no, you're too young. It won't happen now. But she organized for me to come to her school and speak at her school. And they will all grow up with knowing the history, knowing all of that. I've
And would
also
you say that
written it
part
out for
of
them.
Your willingness, your ability, and thought process to be so open with your children or grandchildren comes from not having that in your own home growing up?
I think it comes also from age in a way. That I don't know what I would have done as a 25-year-old. How open would I be to talk about things? I don't know.
Yeah, that makes sense.
But with age, it becomes different, and particularly when I sort of went through a cathartic event. Because, as I said, I thought I wasn't touched by the Holocaust at all. After all, I was living with a family. Well, as far as I know, everything's fine. What do I have to be traumatized by? You know? And it was only when my synagogue asked me, I don't know how many years ago now, but somewhere between 15, 20 years or so ago, to do a reading at a Holocaust memorial event. And I never went to Holocaust memorial events, but I thought it would be churlish to say no. So I said, yeah, of course I will. And in the middle of the reading, I hadn't a clue why I started to cry, and I couldn't control it. and I didn't know what was going on. But afterwards, when I went out and I thought about it, and I thought, obviously I had been fooling myself all this time. And how could I not be picked up trauma, living with a family that went through such trauma and living with all the trauma that I heard about, and maybe being separated from my family had some impact on me, and all of these things. So that opened the doors to me. I don't think I could have gone and spoken in schools without probably that cathartic event. So when a few years later I went to another Holocaust memorial event, and the Israeli ambassador then said, we're living in difficult times because a generation of survivors is dwindling. That was like the moment something clicked in my mind. When I walked out of there, I said to my wife, but I am a survivor. Those exact words, but I am a strange wording even, you know. So that was the moment I sort of came to realize I really was. And then found, you know, I could go to schools and talk about it. Yeah.
Yes, let's talk about that. You belong to an organization, what's the name of it?
It's called the Holocaust Educational Trust.
And how did you find that place to join?
I found it through the internet, as one does. When I realized after what the ambassador said, by saying that we're living in a difficult time, I thought, what's he talking about? It must be something survivors can do. So I went on the net, I found the Holocaust Educational Trust, and I called them and I said, I've just had this experience. So it seems like there's something maybe I should be doing, but I don't know what. And they said, well, would you come and tell us your story? So I did, and they said, would you go to schools as a volunteer for us and talk about your experiences, you know, give this talk. And at that point in time, I have to say, I really was very unhappy with the idea, but I felt it was a duty, an obligation. Clearly survivors had to do something, had to do it. And so
why were you unhappy with it, Uri? Why were you unhappy with it?
I was unhappy because A, I wasn't a public speaker. B, I didn't basically talk about the Holocaust. Mm-hmm. So I thought this is going to be very difficult. And I very quickly discovered that was just the opposite. It gave me a new lease of life, actually. It's been a wonderful thing for me. And the kids have been the base of this whole thing. They've been fantastic. They've been. I speak for roughly an hour solidly, which is a long time for kids to sit and listen to someone going on. And then there's questions and answers. So the whole thing is about an hour and a half. And when I say an hour a talk, I know I've talked over that even. And they're fantastic. They ask great questions. Always new questions come up. I thought it'd be one set of questions. No, they come up with new questions. And just the energy of being in a school makes me feel young. You know, I wish I could keep it, but there we go.
What year did you start doing this?
2013. And
how often do you do it?
It varies. So before the pandemic, the period, of course, is first of all, there's nothing in the summer or on the holidays periods, right? So there's limited periods when you do the talks. Probably, I would say something like 15, 16 talks a year, something like that, I think. I don't know. With the pandemic, it really dropped. First, the talks I did were all on Zoom, which I found very difficult, very unsatisfactory. I couldn't see who I was talking to. And even since then, it's been a little bit slow in starting to revive. Having said that, I did 3 schools in a week just before we went to Amsterdam. So it's picking up again. And
Now,
I've got some schools.
does the organization you belong to, do they they choose the schools?
No, schools come to them.
Schools come to them, okay.
Yeah, and they do a couple of things. They also send educators to schools to help teachers and have materials to help them teach the Holocaust, etc. They take children the older children from schools on trips to Auschwitz. So they'll take 2 kids from a school, always in 2s, from a school for a day trip. It's a long day trip to Auschwitz. So they do other things as well.
What's
and
the
they
age
do
group
these
you're
talks,
speaking to?
Sorry?
What's the age group you're speaking to?
They're usually 13 upwards.
Is it an auditorium full of children, or is it a class?
It's usually auditoriums. It has been once or twice a class, where a small school, and where it's just one class that wanted it, where you have 25 kids or something. But usually you're talking about 100 to 250 kids, because these schools are usually quite big.
And so you must find now that as you're going along and doing them, and how many people you're speaking in front of, that you feel that your public speaking skills have really come a long way.
That no longer is a problem. I'm quite, I'm not. I don't have that issue anymore. I'm quite happy to do that. I've spoken at some universities, and I think the biggest number I've had was about 500 people had a talk.
Wow, that's amazing.
Yeah.
Now, do you ever bring the Star of David to show people that this is something my mother wore?
No, I always take it. It's one of the things I think is very useful to show them, and the kids are interested in it. Yeah.
What was the
Anything
most
that
recent one
physically
you did?
connects you, so I think is important. Sorry?
What was the most recent talk you gave? Where and when?
It was in Northampton, which is about an hour and a quarter or so from Euston, a train from Euston Station. I mean, the whole trip for me was probably about 2 3/4 hours door to door each way. But I don't mind. It's not a big deal. I'd already talked at this school before, and the teacher asked if I'd come back. So.
And when was that? Recently?
Yeah, it was. Let's see. I went to Amsterdam. I'm very bad on dates. It was maybe 8th of December, 11th of December, somewhere like that.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it was.
And we're now in very, very difficult times, as we both know, we've discussed.
Yeah.
And I'd like to know how you feel about what's been happening in Israel, Gaza, and how you feel about that, especially being somebody who's Jewish and who survived the Holocaust, of what happened on October 7th, and how you feel about what has been happening since then.
Right. Well, first of all, with October 7th itself, it was hugely traumatic. I mean, I have a lot of family, and family I feel very close to in Israel. And some of them, one of them was still in the army, but others, young ones, were get called back. And even some of the older members get called to do things, etc. And I remember talking to one of my cousin's daughters. We've known her all her life, feel very close to her. And she said she'd already been to 3 funerals, and so, and at that point in time, they were worried about a family of her husband's, I think, a cousin and his family, a couple and 3 kids. And they didn't know what had happened to them. They were looking for information. And subsequently, when I asked her, have you found the family? Are they okay? And she said they were all killed in one of the kibbutz near the Gaza. They were all killed. So it was hugely traumatic. And hugely traumatic because a dream like I imagine most Jews do of Israel living at peace with its neighbors. And I realize I will never, unfortunately, see that day. I'm too old. The situation there, the way it is there isn't going to be peace suddenly. It's going to be a lengthy process where, I mean, what I find terribly sad is when I think of the Oslo Accords and that period of time, and there were polls on both the Israeli and the Palestinian side, where on both sides, roughly 70% of people said they would live with a 2-state solution. That would, But each of them had a real hardline group that wasn't ready for that. Didn't seem ready to be settling for that. Unfortunately, Hamas, as the hardline group that launched the 7th, have been very open about themselves. They have never hidden, and don't hide it now, that they simply want the destruction of Israel and to kill the Jews. They don't hide that. Some of their supporters in this country, for example, try to pretend like it's not like that. But that's they don't. They're open about it. I can respect that part. I think, though, when I talk to kids, I talk about the danger of extreme ideologies. Any extreme for me, is dangerous, whatever. And I say, this is an extreme ideology. That 70% of Palestinians who were moderates, they get squeezed by the hardliners. And these aren't Democrats, are they? You can't sit down and talk to them. As a Palestinian, I can imagine, you can't go and say, I think this policy is not a very good policy. Not gonna be good for you. So I think it's a tragedy for both people. What's happening is a tragedy for both peoples. And all I can hope is that the moderates can somehow regroup and say, we have to push for peace. This situation cannot continue as it has been. Because if it continues as it is, there will continue to be warfare from time to time. I'm sure that the Israeli army will be able to put a stop to Hamas at this stage for the time being. But, in 2, 3 years, 4 years, it can start again. So I have to believe one day the moderates will be able to do it. There will be 2 states living in peace.
Were you and the people that you know in the synagogue you belong to and in the organization you belong to, is the feeling that you get is that people were shocked by it or not so shocked by it?
Oh, everybody was shocked. I think it came as a huge shock to everyone. I don't think everyone's still scratching their heads how it could happen.
Exactly.
And I think, obviously, after the fighting stops, the Israeli public want a very public inquiry as to what happened, why did it happen, etc. But you can't do that in the middle of the fighting. You can't start doing that. You have to wait.
How would you say that particular event if you don't, if you're willing to say that, how it made you feel, and do you know how it made your children and grandchildren feel? Like, is it, how have you felt that within your family circle
Well,
about that?
what's happened within a family context is that the anti-Semitism has raised its head and actually affected some of the family, which
Would you mind
makes
telling
me
us
very
why?
sad. Sorry?
Excuse me. How has that happened?
Well, my eldest granddaughter, for example, in her school, she had some girl who she doesn't even really know, but they know she's Jewish. She wears a Star of David. She's open about it. She, as I say, organized me to come to the school, and everybody knew I was her grandfather. She came up there and said, "You know, they're killing children and babies." And she's had other those sort of things. Although someone else, after saying something that was a bit hurtful, realizing it withdrew it, and said sorry. So I understood they were more coming from an ignorance point of view rather than being anti-Semitic. What they said was anti-Semitic, but I don't think they knew it at that stage. So the minute they knew it hurt, they backed off from it. But that's
Did she go to the
sad.
principal or anybody to tell them what had happened?
Yeah, she did, and I have to say the school were very good about it. The head gave her a very good. She didn't go about the girl. Sorry, she went about another incident that happened in the school, because the girl she felt was a private thing. She told her mother about it, but she didn't tell the school. It was a private thing. But what happened was she's a prefect in the school, and the school organized a company to come and do some training for the prefects. And the man who came, unfortunately, he asked, did anyone have a job on the weekends? And my granddaughter put her hand up, and he said, "What do you do?" And she said, "I'm a assistant teacher at my synagogue on Sundays." And after that, he gave her a very hard time. And he was also very hard on a black boy in the school, in the group as well. And they both went to the head and complained. And the school, as I say, handled it very well. And the head said to my daughter, "This company is not doing any more work for us. We're not having it. This is unacceptable." And no, they were good. But
Have your
this anti-Semitism,
children had to have a conversation with their children about what's happened, and if this happens, please do this or call us, or has there been that?
I don't know whether the others have had those conversations. Their children are younger, but they're also not here. I mean, in Scotland, they're in a different environment. I don't know if they don't feel it. And in Amsterdam, I don't think they're having any problems. But anti-Semitism in England has gone up 500% or something like that. It's really shocking and makes me very sad.
Have you personally been experiencing that at all since this happened, or in general in the last few years?
Not now. I had a couple of incidents while working here. Only 2 incidents I can think of where I had some issues, but otherwise it's not been an issue.
Oh, and the people in your synagogue, have they experienced it more particularly since October 7th?
I don't know. I haven't discussed it. I really don't know.
Is there security at your synagogue?
Sorry? Is it
Is there security at your synagogue?
Is there security? There is. Unfortunately, all synagogues have security, and heightened, as of 7th of October, heightened security now. It's so sad, to live like that.
What would you say are the similarities of the past and today?
Well, is frightening me, and I know many other people, is that we believed that however slowly the world after World War II was getting better, there was more tolerance, etc., and that the push was to increase that. Not. And then suddenly, in the last few years, we've slid backwards, and people have been spreading hate and all this ideologies of extremism. And it's, as you know, happened in the States. In Israel, Netanyahu has now got a very extreme government. In Brazil, we had Bolsonaro as an extreme government. Here, we don't do so well either. So it's frightening because democracy is under attack, and I think most people in the West don't seem to realize that. Because the war and the dictatorships of Mussolini and Hitler and Stalin and all, those are ancient history for most people. They don't know what that meant. They don't know what these things mean. And so they don't understand when they start going with extreme right wings, in this case. It could be extreme left is not any more democratic either. But they're going with extreme right at the minute. They don't realize that a lot of the democratic freedoms are being eroded. And if you don't stop it, one day you wake up and you find you don't have democracy. And once it's gone, it's very hard to get back. So that worries me.
And
worries me for my
can you pinpoint
children
a
and
time in the
grandchildren.
last
For me, my
how
life
many
is
years where you began to see,
Sorry?
this isn't a good thing. I hope it doesn't keep going. I mean, is there a
Well,
particular point?
There is a point when it started for me. It started with the Brexit vote in this country in 2016. And the minute the vote happened and the Brexit side won, you started to have a lot of reports of attacks on foreigners. And in some cases, I think in one case, I think a Polish person was actually killed in some incident. But usually they were just nasty incidents of people telling them to, you don't belong here, get out and such. You saw people were saying things that they must have been thinking, but didn't feel they had the permission to say, that society had put a lid on these things.
Mm-hmm.
And now suddenly they felt permission had been given and they could start saying these things. And there are no consequences. You know? Yeah. So that's where I think it started
Put it into
me.
words, like what would you consider to be or feel that your fears are from this point of what's going on in the world and in the Middle East? Your specific fears would be what?
My fears are, first of all, that democracy in the West may disappear. That's one fear. And the other fear is that anti-Semitism will grow and Jews will return to being persecuted all over the place again. That, the irony in one sense is Israel was set up to be a safe haven for Jews because the Jews felt wherever they lived, sooner or later it became dangerous. Might be fine today, but no one can guarantee you tomorrow. And so Israel, the idea was in Israel that would be at least one place where you would be safe. Well, it's not proving to be very safe, but at least Israel is able to defend itself, which when you're a minority anywhere else, you can't do much.
Mm-hmm.
If you can try and you can have some allies, but in the end, if the regime becomes against you, if a Hitler type comes in or whatever in your country, what can you do? So that's my other worry. You know? But the worries are not for me. I'm at my age. It's not going to be my problem, but it is an issue for my children, and even more so for my grandchildren, and for everybody. Actually, it's not just for us. It's a huge problem for the West.
And so conversely, do you have hopes, and what are they?
Well, the hope always was that, as I say, I'd love to see, but I continue to dream that there will one day be an Israel and a Palestinian state living in peace side by side, and that the Middle East in general will be peaceful, because a lot of people make the mistake of thinking the only problem in the Middle East is Israel. Israel is the fault of everything. And they don't seem to see all the other problems that have existed in the Middle East, and the wars and civil wars that have existed, which are presumably going on in Yemen. I don't know it doesn't get reported anymore, but there was a civil war, and no one reported that it got resolved. So I imagine it's still not resolved. So I'd like the region to be at peace, that the people's fine. I mean, if you look at Europe went through periods of great turmoil, but is much more peaceful now than in the past. Now, I think a big important part of that is the European Union. That makes it harder for countries to go to war with each other. I mean, the wars that have happened in Europe have not been within the EU. But if you look within the EU and say, can I find another period of 75 years, well, not 73 years of peace? How long is it, peace? 45? 78 years, isn't it? Peace since the war. 78 years, yeah. Can we find another period in Western Europe of peace before World War II? Because you find all kinds of wars. I didn't know there were wars between Sweden and this, and Poland and this, and there were all kinds, but there were always some war going on somewhere. Same. And now we have, so eventually it is possible. It is possible. So I dream that, either we're going to destroy ourselves, because unfortunately we have such weapons now that we can destroy ourselves, or we learn to live with each other. And I'm hoping for the second, which means we need to be tolerant and not have extreme ideologies. Because the point I make to the kids is, it's not people. People are basically very similar. What we share as people is tremendous. What the differences are is very small, but prejudice has a way of enlarging those small things so they become huge, and people get. It's sad. So tolerance is my hope, my dream for the world, of a better world.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Before we invite your lovely wife in, what would you like to say to the younger generations and to the people who'll be watching this everywhere and anywhere? What would your message be? What would you like to say?
Well, my message is what I just said, the need to be tolerant, that to realize that the differences between groups is small. It's the ideologies is another matter. If you have an extreme ideology, you have to fight it. But people as such, the differences are very, very small. And we have to be tolerant and learn to live with each other and learn to deal with our differences in civilized, not violent ways. We can discuss differences. We can come to compromises. No one group has a command on the truth, whatever some people believe. And there are people in every camp who believe they have the truth with a capital T. I happen to not believe that. The truth is out there, scattered bits of truth, and we have to learn to coexist. Yeah.
Do you think the possibility is there?
Well, I took some hope from an interview with President Obama. It was an interview after he was no longer president, and Trump had been president for, I don't know, a year and a half or something like that. And the interviewer was basically saying, is it disheartening to you that Trump is sort of tearing up everything that you did? Almost anything he can find that you did, he's trying to tear down. And Obama's answer was, if you look at progress through history, it's always the same thing. You have some progress, and then the forces of conservatism fight back, and they pull things back a bit. But then comes another wave of progress, and it keeps building. So they take you back a bit, but then you will go forward again. So I took a lot of hope from that. I love that idea, to believe, yes, unfortunately, I'm now living in a time when we seem to be sliding ever faster backwards. But that there will come a time when, again, we will go forward to a better world, to more understanding, to more tolerance. Yeah, I like that thought. You suddenly...
Sorry, I think that's a wonderful... Sorry, I was on mute for the traffic. I think it's a wonderful note for us to end on that today. Okay. And what an honor and a privilege to be here and to speak with you. And can we bring your wife in?
Yes, I will. And I have to say I'm also honored and like the privilege of being able to speak to you and have this record.
The world.
Yeah.
Thank you so much.
Call it. Oh, sorry, I'm not seeing the microphone here.
Hi, Uri. I'd like you to introduce your lovely wife to us.
This is Marnie, and the luckiest day in my life was the day I met her.
But he has to say that because he's sitting next to me.
He told me that the other day when we talked. Were you surprised that he wanted to do this?
No, not that this interview. No, I wasn't, because he talks at schools. So I think I was surprised when he first talked at schools, because it wasn't what Uri ever did. This was new, this talking publicly. And also talking to hundreds of children. I mean, you're talking to 200 kids sometimes. And that did surprise me. And also when you came home and loved it so much, And there were some really unique situations. You went to a girls' Muslim school in Birmingham, and it was one of the best. It was one of the best experiences I think you had. So I think you get a lot from the kids, because the kids make you feel good, and and they're interesting. So I'm not surprised, because it's a continuation, really, isn't it?
And have you felt during the course of your marriage, as you've gone along, that his experiences have come up? Have you experienced him having bad dreams or anything like that, or wanting to talk about it, not wanting to talk about something, or has it not played that significant role? In
my life or in his?
With your life individually, and then yours as a married couple.
I think mine individually, it probably has an impact on why I work in trauma, and I work with refugees.
Oh, you do? Okay.
So I think that is part of the impact on me. I think the impact on you don't remember, but the dreams were not good, and he doesn't remember them when he was younger. So I guess it impacted on me in that way. But mostly I think it's just what I do. I work with people, and I'm interested in their stories, and sadly I work mostly with people who aren't very well, but not anymore, but I did. So yeah, I think so.
Do the dreams still continue, or do they come and go depending on what's going on in life? And does he talk in his dreams?
You were very distressed, but it stopped. It was for the first few years of our marriage, yeah, and then it stopped.
The first few years of your marriage?
Yeah, and you don't remember any of them. He doesn't remember it. it's kind of like,
Vaguely,
didn't happen,
vaguely.
but it did.
I know.
I think that was a surprise,
And,
you know. I hadn't realized that. I hadn't realized that there was a trauma because the story was that he was the survivor. He wasn't a survivor. He wasn't involved. He was totally okay. So I don't think I thought that would happen. And it's obviously been happening without me, you know.
Right.
I
And
just
as he's
haven't-
come along on this journey and the things he's discovered and going overseas, which we didn't touch on, I know you went overseas. That was an interesting story. If, Ollie, if you don't mind, touch on that. The woman that, through your son,
found
Oh,
her.
found it.
Yeah.
Yeah,
yes.
yeah.
Can you please just quickly tell that story?
Oh, okay. In 2019, my son in Edinburgh forwarded to me a email he had received from a woman saying, is your father, I've looked at your Facebook page, you're roughly my age. Is your father by any chance Uri Winterstein, who was in Bratislava in 1944? And so he forwarded it to me, and I answered her and said, yes, that I was there. And that's when she sent me a small digitalized black and white photograph of two babies on someone's knees, and said, that's you and my father, Peter. And that's how I got into touch with the family that had hidden me, that I thought I would never have any way of finding. They found me. Interestingly, her father knew my name, and for whatever reason, it was really important for him to find me. He made a lot of effort. He went to a Jewish old age home in Bratislava. He went to a rabbi, and he was really trying to find me. And then he had to drop it. And then the internet age came, and then they were able to find my son, and through my son, find me.
And you went to see them.
We did.
We did.
Yeah.
We went to see them.
Very nervous about it, but we did. And it was
Just because they're the family doesn't mean you're going to get along. We don't
Yeah.
have a language to speak together, so we were concerned about it. But it was really amazing how good we felt with them in a very short while, like long lost friends or family.
It's like having this family. The only downside is we don't have a language. I mean, the language is very garbled. We speak a bit of this, a bit of that, and it's very difficult. But with Petra, who's the girl,
the
the
daughter.
woman who found Uri, she speaks English. She lives in
the
Los
States.
Angeles. And she lives in the States. She speaks perfect English. So this summer, we went back when she was there. And it was just lovely, wasn't it? It is literally these very strange. These people we have nothing in common with, who grew up under a completely different regime, feel like, they feel like family. And
Like
they
family.
feel that
And this was in
about us.
Bratislava, right? Yes?
Yeah,
Bratislava,
in Bratislava.
Yes. And he's alive, obviously, he's your age. And
Exactly.
do you keep in touch now?
Yes, we
Yeah.
keep in touch.
All the time.
A lot of it is photographs. I have
Yeah.
seen more photographs of Bratislava than I know of London. I know Bratislava better than I know London.
Because it avoids the language problem.
Yes.
It's a way of saying.
What, on a scale of 1 to 10, how would you say that your emotional response was seeing him, considering you were babies and really don't remember each other?
Well, my emotional reaction once we were there, it was off the scale. It was.
It's very
Just-
interesting.
I've not had such an experience. I just feel very close to him.
Do you feel like in meeting him, it validated this experience that you had of what happened to you at that time and that you were a survivor because he was as well and you went through this really odd experience?
I don't know what it. I mean, for me, it's more that I thought all my life there was this family who took this enormous risk in hiding me, and I have no way to even thank them or say anything. And then you meet some of the family, and they prove to be lovely people.
And they're very warm,
Very warm
welcoming,
and
everything was lovely.
just
And hopefully they will visit us. He won't visit us because
He
he
won't
won't
travel.
travel. He won't travel.
I try to get him
Yeah,
here.
but
He
she
won't- he
will. The
won't
wife
travel.
will travel with Petra, hopefully this year.
We
That's the
hope.
plan.
Did his family know his story?
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
His daughter said she tells a story to her children as well, and the whole family, loved the story. I mean that.
And you did a
So
Zoom.
they should.
You did a Zoom with one of the daughters.
That was to help her. Yeah.
Yeah.
That was different things that we starting. Her daughter was 13 at school, had to do an interview. I forget, it wasn't a Holocaust survivor, it was someone. And so her mother asked, would I do an interview? And I said, yeah, delighted, So the more things we can do together, the closer we can be. Yeah.
And in closing this part of the interview, do you feel like everything that you've done, especially since with the organization you belong to, and then finding what really is a bit of a long lost family, that it's maybe never come full circle, but that it's quite close to coming full circle in your life
does
of
to
what
some
you know and
extent.
have experienced?
It does to some extent, because it's made me face up to all the things that I had been denying myself, so much of my life. So in that sense, you're coming around the circle and recognizing what was there, but you hadn't. The mind is a
And
very
Marnie, did you
strange
see it
thing.
before he did?
Sorry?
Did you see this, what he needed to come around full circle before he did, but he just took him a while to find that?
I did, but
He
I
did.
didn't think he ever would. I was very surprised because I think the story was cast iron. The family story, the story from my mother-in-law, the story from my sister-in-law. I never met my father-in-law, but it was a cast iron story that he was not anybody who survived. They all survived. They all survived horrible things, but he didn't. He was lucky. He was okay. He was so he kind.
You're right in that extent.
Yeah,
He
they
was
are right. But
lucky.
in the family sort of model,
Yeah.
it put you in
Yeah.
a very strange place. So I didn't think you would ever be where everybody else was. So that was a surprise.
And did you feel that and did you personally feel like he should be? He should be feeling.
Well, yeah, I'm a therapist and I'm a psychologist, so of course I did. But I also felt it was unhealthy because I thought it was an unhealthy label that you'd been given and everybody else had been given a different label, and I didn't like that. I'm not into labels, and I found that quite hard. And I thought that wasn't right, but it was how they thought
Well-
it needed to be. Yeah,
Yes.
you know.
Well, it seems that way, and it seems that you've each found a wonderful partner to share this life story with, and I can't even begin to tell you how deeply, deeply honored and pleased I am to have shared this story with you and bring it to the Shoah Foundation. And my understanding is that you have a few pictures to show.
Sorry?
Sorry?
Are there some pictures to show? There's
Oh,
the
the
star
pictures.
that we want to show again,
Well,
and then there's a family picture.
Where
I
are
don't-
your pictures?
I don't know how to do. I sent you the pictures, so I don't know what to do with that. How we deal with that.
So you have
I was shown a picture of what looked like your family, maybe in Brazil, the four of you.
No,
And then there's
that's
the
in
thumb drive, I
Bratislava.
think.
That picture is in Bratislava, with the Danube behind us and the castle in Bratislava. And I would have been 4 years old probably in that picture, but it was my parents and sister and myself.
Uri, what is that you have in your hand right now?
I've got the Yellow Star of David, which the Germans said, well, in this case, the Slovak authorities said, all Jews in Slovakia over the age of 6 had to wear any time that they left their homes. It was in order for anyone else to know who was a Jew, because the Jews were not living in a ghetto, they were living scattered amongst the population. So this identified you as a Jew. Now, neither my sister nor I knew that we had a Star of David in our house until my mother died. And so we don't know whether it was my father's or my mother's or why it was kept. But I have imagined it was kept as a reminder that what happened was real. It wasn't just a nightmare. It really did happen.
Okay, thank you. Cut?
This is a photograph of my parents, my sister, and myself standing by the River Danube in Bratislava with a castle that dominates the town behind us. This was probably taken when I was aged 4, maybe just turned 5, roughly that time. This is a photograph of myself and another baby lad with whom I was living at the time, with his mother. This was a hidden family that I was staying with. I guess we were probably aged, 8 months there or something like that.